The night Astrid was born, 3 women no one invited stepped into the longhouse like they owned the snow. No one saw the door open, but frost swept across the threshold anyway, a glittering tongue that licked the rushes and sent the hearth's flames shivering upright. Old Solveig, who knew every superstition and practiced half of them, later swore that the wind carried thread and iron, and the faintest smell of wet wool, which is either very specific or a poetic way of saying fate, had come dressed as a winter traveler. Astrid's mother, Freya, not that Freya, let's not start rumors, was too exhausted to object. She was occupied with the astonishing fact that she'd pushed a new heartbeat into the world, and it was currently accusing everyone of treason by screaming. The 3 women circled the cradle. One had hair like river silt and fingers stained with dye. One wore a knife at her belt and a look that said she had 12 places to be, and the third had eyes that made the room behave. They did not speak in riddles, which was considerate, but they did speak like people who assume you'll remember every word for the rest of your life. They named the stitches that will hold a child's days together, a bargain that must be kept, a bridge that must be crossed, and a question that must be answered. Then, because every good prophecy needs a twist, otherwise what are we even doing here? They laid a small iron spindle in the cradle and told Astrid's mother, keep it hidden until she asked for it. Naturally, no one asked when she would know to ask. That's the thing about women who look like they could embroider the horizon. You do not interrupt. Years pass in the way years do when you have goats, whether the occasional raider pretending not to be a raider, and a village where the gossip moves faster than ravens. Astrid grew up with hair that never agreed with braids, a laugh that snapped people out of sulking, and the unsettling talent of knowing when things were about to happen. She didn't predict the future. Don't picture a trance and cryptic syllables. She mostly predicted soup boiling over. But every now and then she would pause mid-sentence, tilt her head like a dog listening for thunder, and then say something like, we should bring the nets in 15 minutes before storm punished the fjord. Naturally, this made her popular with fishermen and deeply suspicious to a handful of people who resent being saved from their own bad timing. Astrid's father, Hjalti, was a shipwright who talked to his wood. Not like a madman. Mind you, he simply believed a keel that had been greeted would carry you kinder. He had hands like roots and a habit of humming the same 4 notes whenever he worried. He also had, tucked away in a chest under bed where every child eventually looks, the iron spindle. He told himself he'd know when to give it. He imagined thunder and a beam of light and a wise voice. He did not imagine a day when Astrid would be 15, angry about absolutely nothing and absolutely everything, and would say, what's that humming under the bed? While pointing at the chest. The spindle was singing, barely audible, the way a kettle sings before it boils. Hjalti opened the chest, noticed that nothing else in it mattered anymore, and put the spindle in Astrid's hands. It was cold at first, then warmer than palms, then exactly the temperature of a decision. Now, before you think our girl immediately transformed into a rune-wielding fate spinner, please recall that most epic destinies begin with someone tripping over their own certainty. Astrid did try to spin the air. The air, unhelpfully, remained air. She tried to spin thread from sheep's fleece, which resulted in an honest thread and a dishonest assessment of her patience. For a while she kept the spindle tucked into her belt like a secret dagger and pretended it wasn't there, which is a classic teenage move regardless of century. Meanwhile, dreams arrive with the persistence of tax collectors. In one, a huge wolf breathed fog over a frozen river, while a thin rope held the world together. In another, a one-eyed man weighed her laughter against a feather and frowned, which felt rude, but who argues with a man whose ravens do double duty as gossip columnists. Astrid didn't tell anyone. She liked the dreams and feared them, and besides, who would she tell? Hello, Mother. Hello, Father. By the way, the universe keeps leaving notes in my head. Please pass the butter. The day the sea sky went green, 2 remarkable things happened. First, the village's oldest woman, who always said she'd leave this world with both hands and bread dough, did precisely that. Second, a stranger arrived at the edge of the pine wood in clothes that had no right staying that dry. He carried no pack, though he looked like someone who had always just set a pack down, and his smile had all the warmth of someone who knows a shortcut through snow. We will get to him. Yes, he is important. No, you may not skip ahead. A story is a longhouse. Come in at the door we open for you. Astrid was in the shallows, helping untangle nets that the storm had decorated with particularly malicious sense of humor. She felt the change before she saw it. Not the air, though that, too, had the metallic taste of lightning bitten before it could bite, but the line inside her that had always hummed softly, as if she were a door someone might knock on. It tightened. She looked up to see the aurora leak across the afternoon sky, a smear of green where no green belonged. The world held its breath. Then the stranger stepped from the trees, and every gull in the bay forgot to call. "Good day," he said, as if days needed his endorsement. "I'm looking for a girl with a spindle." There are worse opening lines. There are also safer ones. Astrid, to her credit, did not raise the spindle like a weapon. She tucked it behind her, which fooled exactly no one, because fate is not mislaid like a spoon. "We have many girls," she said, because deflection is an art, "and several spindles. Perhaps you could be more vague." He laughed in the agreeable way of people who are used to causing trouble and somehow being thanked for it. "You're Astrid," he said, and when she did not deny it, he added, "I've come a message from a woman who knows how the ends of ropes feel. In the North, we do not say names we don't have to say in the open air. But 3 sisters live under every tale, and thread is how they breathe." Astrid's palms prickled. She told herself to be careful, then did not listen, because you can't tell your blood to be reasonable any more than you can tell tides to stop showing off. "What message?" she asked. "That you will be asked to trade something you can't live without," he said cheerfully, which is a tone no one should use for such news, "and you must decide whether can is a truth or just a habit." Then he looked at the green wound in the heavens and squinted. "Also, please don't die before winter. It would be inconvenient. Let's pause a moment, because you and I both know that when a charming stranger delivers omens like a baker delivers rolls, casually and slightly warm, you should either run or demand a receipt. Astrid did neither. She asked him his name, and he said, "Call me Einar," which is a sort of name that sounds honest because 1,000 grandfathers used it, which, if you've met the gods, you know is not evidence of anything. Einar embedded himself in the village the way birds embed themselves in goats. Unavoidable, irritating, and somehow endearing if you squint. He helped Jalti plant a keel and told a dirty joke to the wood, so it would relax, which Jalti pretended not to appreciate, while clearly appreciating it. He charmed Freya by complimenting her pickled herring like a poet who had recently learned the word brine. He taught children how to whistle with birch bark and convinced old men their knees hurt less if they cursed in meter. And at night, when Astrid slipped out to the standing stones above the cliff, yes, those standing stones, the ones that always look surprised to find themselves left outdoors, she found him already there, listening to something only he could hear. "Whose side are you on?" she asked on the 3rd night, because if you ask the question 3 times in a story like this, you're either about to get an answer or make someone very nervous. He did not look at her. "Depends on the day." That's not an answer. It's the only honest one. Astrid should have left it there. But curiosity is just hunger wearing jewelry. And besides, her dreams had begun to braid themselves into waking. She saw the wolf again, and this time the rope was threads twisted to sound. Her father's humming notes, the clack of her mother's loom, the pulse of her own heartbeat counting patient as oars. The wolf's breath rattled the river ice. Einar stood beside her, not in the dream, but when she blinked, he was there in the stones, eyes tilted up to the shimmering sky, as if the same green had been poured inside him. The first real sign that the story had opened like a door was not the aurora or the stranger or even the spindle's insistence. It was the fish. They came in numbers that belonged in boasting songs. Silverbacks chopping the bay until it looked like a bowl of spilled coins. The village thanked every god in alphabetical order, which is a lot of thanking, and smoked enough fish to perfume the mountain. But on the 10th day, the fish stopped as if a hand had closed. Men return with empty nets and the same look as gamblers when their luck checks its calendar and discovers it's late for someone else. Astrid felt the absence like a pulled tooth. If the sea is a mother, and it is a harsh one, then something had made her turn her face away. "Someone's taken what isn't theirs," Einar said. He said it lightly, like some people say it might rain, but his jaw had the particular tension of a man who is remembering debts. Or perhaps someone has come to collect. That evening, old Solveig called a gathering. She lit the good lamp, the one that makes everyone look honest, and fed the fire juniper, which makes the smoke smell like sanctified forests. People asked the questions people always ask when luck leaves the room. What did we do wrong? Who did the wrong thing? Is this a punishment? Astrid listened, turning the spindle slowly in her lap. The iron no longer felt like iron. It felt like a path. When the room had exhausted all the ways it could worry, Solveig told a story. She spoke of a river beneath all rivers, a secret road where bargains walk in single file, carrying their own shadows. Once in a long while, she said, that road crosses into our world, and when it does, everything you borrowed asks to be returned in full measure and with interest. No one likes to think of breath as borrowed, or warmth, or children, or fish, and yet you can see why people prefer festivals. What crosses with the road? Astrid asked. Wolves, said Solveig, and questions with teeth. That night, you already know Astrid didn't sleep. Neither did the sky. The green held, not blazing now, but sulking, near dawn. When the frost plays at writing its own runes on the eaves, Astrid heard a sound like thread snapping in another room. She went out to the cliff with the stones and found, sitting on the lowest, a man with a broad back, a drum between his knees, and tattoos that ran across his arms like a map someone made from thunder. He beat a slow pattern that sounded like a heart remembering it had somewhere to be. Einar watched from a higher stone, unreadable in that infuriating way he had when he knew more than was healthy. You brought him? Astrid asked. He brought himself, Einar said, which, as explanations go, is a cousin of not explaining at all. The drummer looked up. His eyes were wolf yellow, which you would think is a metaphor until it isn't. Girl, he said, as if she were the only age he recognized. Do you know how to measure courage? Badly, Astrid said before she could filter it. I tend to measure it after I need it. He grinned, bright as a blade pulled from a pile of dull ones. Good. Better than the ones who count first and bleed later. He tapped the drum. A river is walking. When it arrives, someone must ask a question. What question? The last one you can afford, he said. Bring your spindle. And bring a promise you can't keep. Astrid looked at Einar, but Einar had become intensely interested in a distant cloud, which was not distant and not a cloud. And if you are wondering whether that evasiveness was charming or infuriating, yes. She tucked the spindle into her belt, found her father's humming in her throat, and said to the drummer, If I ask the river a question, will the fish return? Oh, little Stitch, he said gently, and the nickname fit more than it should have. That is not the kind of question rivers answer. Rivers answer the ones you hide from yourself. Astrid wanted to be braver than she felt. She also wanted to be someone whose hands did not shake when drums talked. But the line in her, the one like a door, was no longer waiting for a knock. It had swung open. She went to the pine wood where the path to the cliff begins. There on the ground lay 3 things that had not been there the night before: a length of red thread, a bronze needle, and a smooth river stone with a hole worn through the center. Gifts or warnings, or both. She took the stone and saw the world through its little circle. When she put it to her eye, the sky's green looked closer, like something she had touched if she didn't mind being changed. She returned to the stones as the drummer changed his rhythm to one that remembered boats. Villagers gathered on the cliff path, drawn by rumor's invisible rope. Children tried to look unimpressed and failed. Jalti stood with his arms folded like a barrier anyone could walk through. Freya held a loaf of bread, as if she could bribe fate with yeast. Solveig pressed a sprig of juniper into Astrid's hand and whispered, If you must give, give something you were never sure was yours. And yes, if you're wondering whether Astrid understood any of this, she did not. She understood only that there are moments when the world asks, and you cannot pretend not to hear. Down in the bay, the water moved against itself and formed, impossibly, a road, not a bridge. Bridges are what people make when they agree on rocks, but a braided path of ice and foam and memory, leading out toward a scar of green in the sky. Einar breathed in through his teeth, which is a sound men make when the game is about to get interesting. The drummer's beat matched the heart of something too large for ribs. Astrid stepped forward and put the river stone to her eye again, and through that circle she saw a figure walking the water road toward them, a lithe shadow with a rope of runes around its throat. Each step left a letter glowing and then dissolving, as if the world itself were trying to read but had forgotten its alphabet. The figure stopped at the edge of the cliff and raised one hand. The hand held nothing, the nothing glittered. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of every promise anyone had ever meant at the time. Astrid felt the spindle heat against her hip like an answer waiting for its question. "Who will ask?" said the figure. Astrid looked at her parents, at Einar, at the village that had taught her how to be useful and inconvenient in equal measure. Then she did what she had been not so subtly prepared to do since before she was good at braids. She stepped forward and said, "I will." The figure regarded her like someone trying to remember a song. "What will you give, little Stitch?" Astrid thought of Solveig's words. She thought of the spindle, of thread, of breath, of laughter weighed against feathers. She thought of the wolf in her dreams, waiting for the sound of rope. "I will give what keeps me myself," she said, though she could not have said what that was, which is a kind of sentence you only say when you're either a fool or a hero. Sometimes the difference is an echo. "Ask," said the figure, and Astrid, who had always measured courage after she needed it, asked the river the last question she could afford. You've heard the expression, silence before the storm. But what they never mention is that sometimes the silence is a storm, stretched so thin it hums. That's how the world felt the moment Astrid's question left her lips. The river stilled, as if it had been waiting all this time just to be asked. Everyone on the cliff held their breath, including people who normally refused to hold anything that wasn't ale. We don't know exactly what Astrid asked, not yet, because memory, as the gods will tell you, is less of a record and more of a storyteller with a taste for drama. What we do know is that the question reached down into the coldest part of the current and tugged something loose. The figure on the water smiled. Not the kind of smile that makes you feel safe. The other kind, the kind that says, "You have been noticed." It nodded once, as if to confirm a transaction, and then dissolved into mist. The river road vanished with it, sucked back into the sea as if embarrassed to have been seen. The sky sighed. The green light dimmed. The villagers exhaled in one long collective gasp that sounded suspiciously like, "What now?" Astrid's hand still held the spindle, which was glowing faintly. Not like fire, but like something remembering how to be light. The drumbeat stopped. The drummer bowed his head, muttered a word that made frost bloom on the stone, and disappeared without moving, which is a talent no one appreciates until they see it. Einar looked at Astrid with that complicated expression of his, equal parts admiration, terror, and, "Oh, dear, now I actually have to help." "Astrid," he said softly, "what did you ask?" She blinked. The question slipped from her mind like a fish from a net. I don't remember." Now, before you accuse our heroine of selective amnesia, understand this. Certain bargains in the North work precisely because you can't recall the details. If you did, you have a chance to undo them, and fate, like any proper bureaucrat, hates paperwork. The sea stayed quiet for 3 days. Then it began to give back what it had taken. Fish returned to the bay in slow, cautious schools, as though they were checking if the coast had learned its manners. The villagers celebrated. Of course, humans are excellent at declaring a miracle before reading the fine print. They sang, drank, and toasted Astrid until she nearly drowned in compliments. She smiled, pretending she wasn't worried by the way her dreams had gone silent. Even the wolf was gone, which, depending on how much you trust wolves, was either a relief or a bad omen dressed as peace. Einar remained by her side, fixing boats he claimed were for practice, though no one had asked him to. He told stories when she couldn't sleep, about gods who had misplaced their own names, about a ship made of dead men's nails, which, yes, is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds, and about a woman who spun the night sky into thread and sold it to poets. Do you believe those stories? Astrid asked once. Believe? No, Einar said, smiling. I remember them. That was the kind of answer that made Astrid want to throw him into the fjord, and then immediately dive in after him. But fate, have you noticed how it never waits for convenient timing? Had other plans. On the 5th morning after the river road vanished, the first raven arrived. It perched on the roof of the longhouse and screamed, which is standard raven behavior. But this one screamed her name. Astrid nearly dropped the bucket she was carrying. The bird's feathers shimmered oddly, as if they contained a memory of every night sky. It stared at her, tilted its head, and in a voice that sounded like echo trapped in ice said, "He is waiting." "Who?" Astrid whispered, though of course she knew. The one-eyed man from her dreams, the frown like winter itself. The raven croaked once, then plucked a thread from its own wing, a strand of darkness, and dropped it at her feet. It was light as breath, but when she picked it up, her fingers went numb. On its surface shimmered runes that rearranged themselves as if shy. They spelled, "Follow the silence." The villagers didn't see the raven's gift, only the way Astrid stood motionless in the yard, her eyes distant. "Bad luck," someone muttered. "Ravens are messengers," said Solveig, who had lived long enough to know that bad luck and messages are often the same thing. Astrid turned to Einar. "We're going north," she said. Einar, who had been hoping to finish his breakfast before destiny resumed, sighed. "Of course we are." They left before dusk. Jalti pressed a knife into her hand. Freya tucked a loaf of bread, and a char made of salt and nettles into her pack. "Don't look back," her mother said, which is exactly what Astrid did the moment she reached the ridge. She saw the village shrink behind them, smoke curling from roofs, sea glinting like scales, and felt a sudden ache, the kind that doesn't belong to loss yet, but already rehearses it. They walked for days through pine forests that smelled of stories, crossed rivers that whispered under their breath, and camped under skies so clear they seemed hollowed out. The raven followed, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always just out of reach. On the third night, Astrid dreamed again. This time she stood in a hall, with walls made of mist. At its center was a loom the size of the horizon, and a woman sat weaving with thread that glowed like lightning veins. Astrid tried to speak, but the woman raised a hand. "You've already asked your question," she said. "Now live toward the answer." When Astrid woke, Einar was staring at the sky. "You saw her too," he said quietly. Not a question. Astrid didn't ask how he knew. She didn't want to know how many dreams they shared. The next day, snow fell even though it wasn't the season for it. The flakes were heavy and slow, each one whispering faintly as it landed. Astrid leaned closer to listen, and froze. The snow was speaking in fragments. Her name, the river's hum, her father's tune. Einar caught one on his tongue, frowned, and said, "That's unpleasantly specific." They reached the mouth of a cave carved into the side of a black mountain. Ravens circled above it in spirals too precise to be natural. Astrid felt the spindle pulse at her belt. "This is it," she said. "The silence." Inside, the cave was warm. That was wrong. Caves are supposed to be cold and echoing. This one breathed like something alive. The deeper they went, the louder the silence became. And yes, that makes sense. Silence isn't the absence of sound here. It's the pressure of something holding its breath. The walls shimmered faintly, wet not with water but with reflected memories. A child's first step, a ship's first sail, a god's first lie. Astrid saw them all flicker past and felt dizzy. In the heart of the cave stood a pool as still as glass. On its surface floated an image of the world above, inverted, shimmering, slightly wrong. "I think this is where the road begins again," Einar said. "Or ends. The two are cousins." Astrid touched the spindle to the water. It sang. The same tune her father hummed, but deeper, older. The reflection rippled and shifted until she saw a shape forming beneath it. The wolf. Larger now. Older. Waiting. "He's real," she whispered. "He's coming." "Yes," Einar said, "and he's hungry." "Hungry for what?" "For what you promised." Astrid's mind reeled. "I don't remember what I promised." "Exactly," Einar murmured. "That's why promises work." The wolf's eyes opened under the water, pale gold, full of recognition. "Little Stitch," it growled, its voice both inside and outside her skull. "You pulled the thread. Now see what unravels." The pool erupted. Water rose like a column, twisted and burst outward, drenching the cave in light. Astrid fell backward, clutching the spindle. For an instant she saw a vision. The village, The sea frozen mid-wave, her parents standing still as statues. Then darkness swallowed it all. When she woke, she was lying on snow that wasn't cold, surrounded by sky that wasn't sky. Einar was beside her, sitting cross-legged, tossing a pebble into nothingness. "Welcome," he said. "You've crossed." "Cross where?" He gestured vaguely around them. "Between, where the gods go to rehearse being mortal." The air shimmered. Shapes formed in the distance. Halls of mist, ships drifting through clouds, a bridge of light far above them. Astrid rose unsteadily. "Are we dead?" Einar smiled. "No, not yet. But someone will be soon, if you don't finish what you started." And here, dear listener, we must pause. Because yes, our brave and occasionally reckless Astrid has stepped into the space between worlds, but the thread she carries, that innocent iron spindle, is already whispering the name of the life it's about to change. So if you think you know what she asked the river, hold that thought. The answer is coming, and like all good Nordic answers, it will not arrive quietly. The between smelled like pine after rain and old iron left in snow. It looked like everything you've ever seen reflected in a lake, only slightly braver. Astrid took a step, and the ground made a sound like a loom shifting weight. And if you think that's too on the nose for a girl carrying a spindle, take it up with the author of Coincidences. Einar walked as if he remembered the path with his feet more than his mind, which was either reassuring or exactly the opposite. Above them hung a bridge made of light, so pale it was almost manners, arching toward a horizon that had forgotten to end. Below them drifted ships with sails of fog, each carving nothingness that closed like a healed wound as soon as they passed. Somewhere distant, a horn practice being inevitable. Is this where gods go when they don't want to be recognized? Astrid asked, because whispering felt rude and shouting felt like trespass. It's where stories meet to compare versions, Einar said, and where debts learn to spell their names. That's when the air remembered it was a doorway. A woman stepped through wearing shadow, like a well-cut cloak. Her hair was the color of iron when it decides to be moonlight. Her eyes had the calm of someone who can untangle knots by looking at them sternly. She did not ask who Astrid was. She asked the kind of question that reveals who you've been practicing to be. What do you want that doesn't belong to anyone else? Astrid opened her mouth and discovered that her usual answers, safety for her village, warmth for her parents, fish in the nets, were all, technically, owned by the world in general. She thought of smaller things. A certain laugh that jumped out of her throat without permission. The song her father hummed that no one else knew how to hum exactly wrong and exactly right. The way her name felt when her mother said it softly, as if letters could be bred. "Myself," Astrid said finally, because honesty could be clumsy and still be true. The woman's mouth curved. "You already traded part of that at the cave mouth," she said, like someone who checks ledgers. "We're here to see what your question cost, and whether the change can be stitched without tearing." Astrid's heart did that unhelpful thing where it galloped off and forgot to send a postcard. "What did I ask?" "You asked how to keep what keeps you yourself," the woman said. The river answered, "By learning what you are without it," which is precisely the sort of answer the gods love, helpful like a riddle, infuriating like a mirror. Astrid wanted to argue that this was neither kind nor fair. Einar coughed softly, the universal sign of please don't pick a fight with cosmology. The woman's gaze shifted to him with the smallest, sharpest suspicion, as if looking at a knife to see whether it's a tool or a story about to happen. "You," she said. "Have you told her your name yet?" Einar smiled in a way that felt like a door, closing gently. Names travel badly across certain bridges. The woman let that pass, which told Astrid nothing and everything. "Come," the woman said, and though she never introduced herself, 3 ravens wrote Modgut in the air with their wings, and if you've heard tales of the guard of the bridge that leads below, you know not to test precision of her patience. Astrid followed Modgut across a span that looked narrow and turned out to be generous in all the ways that matter. Beneath, the between went on being unfathomable with conviction. On the other side, a hall waited that was more absence than architecture. In the center, a well sat, and in the well, a depth that made Astrid's bones remember being water. The spindle warmed. Runes breathed along the iron like frost becoming script. Einar stayed one pace behind, courteous as a lie told a spare feeling. On the well's lip perched a head. Yes, a head. Before you object, please note that nothing here is trying to make this easy for your sense of decorum. The head's beard flowed like roots. Its single eye was closed with the politeness of sleep that's really listening. The well smelled like oak and old secrets. Don't stare, Einar murmured. I'm not, Astrid lied. The head spoke without bothering to move its mouth, which is a luxury of those who have hired ravens to handle facial expressions. The wolf is walking, said the thought that arrived where sound should have been. He follows the line you loosened with your question. I didn't loosen any, Astrid began, and then stopped, because memory isn't a witness, it's a collaborator. She remembered the river road, the figure woven of promises, the feeling of not slipping in some backward room of the world. What does he want? She asked, although the part of her that knew answers before she thought of questions already grieved. What wolves always want, thought the head, to bite through certainty, to test the teeth of the end, to be what he is. Then, because perhaps pity is not entirely retired from service among the old powers, it added, he'll come first to what you love, because that's where the fabric is strongest. Astrid pictured the cove, the longhouse, her father's hands, her mother's stubborn bread, the gulls that insulted fishermen with equal opportunity. The spindle thrummed like a plucked nerve. Tell me how to stop him. Bind him, thought the head. With what? Gleipnir? Astrid said the word like a prayer and a dare. The impossible binding made once in the breath of fish, the roots of mountains, the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of women, the sinews of the bear, the spit of birds, the rope that should not exist, and therefore did. Gleipnir has already had its day, thought the head, with that weary charity wisdom gets when asked to repeat itself over centuries. You'll have to make another. With what? Astrid demanded. There's no more beard of women left. Always jokes about that, Einar muttered. Every era never gets old. And Cat still refused to take notes. The head's closed eye smiled, which is a sentence you only get to write here. Gleipnir held, because it was made of what could not be counted. Make yours of something he cannot bite. What is that? Astrid asked. He bites everything. Your name, thought the head, spun into thread. Before you shout at the page. Yes, Astrid had just learned she left her name on a stone ledge when she crossed. Yes, names are not simply labels here. They're anchors and mirrors and keys. Yes, this sounds like asking a locksmith to forge a key from the concept of home. And yet, the between deals in exactly that sort of currency. I gave my name, Astrid said. To enter. You let it wait, Modgud corrected mildly. What you gave was memory of its shape. The name itself still knows you, but it won't answer unless you answer first. To what? Astrid asked, and if your head hurts, join the queue. To who you are when it doesn't, Modgud said. The wolf will arrive at the place where your name is spoken most often. If you want your thread, meet him there and speak the name you haven't got, and mean it. Mean a thing I can't remember? It will remember you, Einar said softly, and Astrid tried very hard not to listen to the way his voice made certainty out of rumor. They left the hall with the well that was a mind and crossed back over the pale bridge that never cast a shadow. The between thinned until pine, and wind returned like a song remembering its chorus. The cave mouth waited. Snow forgot be magic, and resumed being cold. Astrid paused on the threshold, because thresholds have opinions, and looked at Einar. If I can't say my name, she said, what happens if you say it? That depends who I am when I do, he said. Who are you? He smiled like a man who has asked himself the same question for too long. A friend, he said. And if you think that's insufficient, you're right. But sometimes the right word has to be grown into. Back through the pine. Back over the ridge. Back to the cliff where the standing stones watched with that infuriating stone look of we've seen worse and also better. The bay lay below like a hell breath. The village shimmered with the wrong kind of stillness. Not empty, worse. Paused. People mid-step. A gull mid-scream. Jalti mid-stir. The wooden spoon caught in the air between pot and mouth, as if time had been caught thinking about something else. Freya's loaf half-sliced, knife hovering above bread, like an unresolved sentence. Astrid's feet forgot how to be gentle and ran. Astrid, Einar said, grabbing her wrist, and yes, it looked like a lover's grasp, and no, we're not making this that story. Not yet, calm down. He's here, he said. Do not call until you're ready to bind. Astrid swallowed air like she could hoard it. The spindle beat against her hip. The green scar in the sky brightened like an eye learning how to stare. And then the wolf stepped out of the shadow of a net hung to dry, which is absolutely the sort of indignity a world ender would choose for his entrance, just to remind everyone that even small things cast the right kind of darkness. He was vast without being large, which you'll understand if you've ever been in a room with a truth that didn't need volume to fill it. His fur was night taught to move. His mouth was a door with ideas about closure. His eyes found Astrid the way a road finds a destination. Little Stitch, he said, and somehow it wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was familiar. Leave them, Astrid said, and look, if you want style points for speeches at moments like this, find another saga. She spoke like someone who had run out of anything but earnestness. Take me? The wolf's tongue tested his teeth, tasting the word me like a spice. I always do, he said, and then, because destruction can be patient when it wants to savor, he waited. Astrid lifted the spindle. The iron drank the green from the sky, and returned it as thread. So fine, it was almost apology. I need my name, she said to nobody in the whole world. The village's silence pressed on her back like a hand asking a question. Modgud's voice that was not a voice moved through her like a remembered rule. Mean it. She looked at her father frozen in the art of feeding himself, and thought of a tune that made boats behave. She looked at her mother, knife hovering, and thought of bread as a daily miracle disguised as habit. She looked at the eaves, at the hook where a child's cloak hung, at the scuff on the threshold where her foot had learned to be home. I am the person made by these, she said, and the thread brightened. I am the hand that holds a spindle and a shoreline and a promise. The thread brightened more. The wolf watched, amused like a teacher who suspects a clever student is about to invent a new mistake. Einar stood at her shoulder. He had been silent too long for his nature. You could almost hear his silence pace. Say it, Astrid hissed. If you know it. I do, he said. And there it was, the confession nobody asked for but everyone suspected. Of course he knew it. He'd said it when she was asleep in a forest, when he pulled her out of a stream that tried to keep what wasn't offered, when he needed to go wrong beside Freya just to make her laugh right, when he told aboard a dirty joke, so it would become a ship. He had known it every time he kept from saying it, which is a kind of intimacy the gods invented for their own trouble. Say it, Astrid said again, and then quieter, because bravery and pleading share root. Please. Einar closed his eyes. If this were a simple tale, he would speak, and the name would leap like a fish into a net. But the between had rules, and names do too. You can speak a name to save someone. You can speak a name to own someone. You can speak a name to call them home. The difference is who you are when your mouth opens. Einar breathed once like a man about to admit that a story has two truths, and then he said a word that the air caught and the stones agreed to. Nothing happened, which is, of course, something happening. The thread in Astrid's spindle dimmed. The wolf's mouth rearranged into what might, in a less terrifying creature, be a smile. Not yours to speak that way, he said, pleased like a riddle that has watched someone step around the answer. Astrid's cheeks went cold. Why? Because he is what he is, Modgud said from nowhere and everywhere, which is an annoying habit of threshold keepers. And because you ask to learn what you are without being told. Einar's jaw tightened. The mild, inward kind of fury reserved for men who are very good at mischief and discover it as limits. I can guide, he said helplessly. I cannot give. Astrid looked at the wolf and felt, like a distant drumbeat catching up to a march, the rhythm in her ribs that wasn't fear. It was recognition. The thread warmed again, soft and stubborn. I am the girl whose mother says my name like bread, she said. I am the girl whose father hums my name into wood. The thread brightened. I am the girl whose village puts my name into sentences like instructions and scoldings and jokes that think they're practical. Brighter. The wolf cocked his head, amused, then alert. The green in the sky thickened, pouring itself down the air like syrup forgetting to be elegant. Astrid lifted the spindle and did what she had not known she knew how to do. She spun what cannot be counted. The aftertaste of laughter, the echo of a footstep that decided not to creak, the breath before a word begins to be itself. The thread formed between iron and air, pale and impossible. She felt the absence where a name would park itself in a person, and she did not fill it with panic. She filled it with everything that had ever bent toward her. When someone said, "You?" "Little Stitch," the wolf said again, softer now, almost no. "No, not kind. Curious. Will you bind me with words you don't have?" "With the space they leave," she answered. "And if you've never been brave in exactly that way, it's fine. Most people never need to be. Open your mouth." He did, because arrogance is obedient to its own sense of theater. Astrid flung the thread. It crossed the air like a rumor that had found its proof. It wrapped once around his jaws, twice, thrice, each loop humming with the hunger of what she refused to let be devoured. The wolf bit down. Teeth met not resistance, but meaning, and meaning is trickier to chew than rope. For a heartbeat, hers the village's, the skies, the world held. Then the thread flickered. The wolf snarled laughter. "Good," he said, delighted by opposition. "Now give me what keeps this from breaking." Astrid knew before she knew. She looked at her village, frozen but listening. She looked at Einar, who was Einar, which is more complicated than it sounds. She looked at the spindle. It hummed a question shaped like a cost. She remembered the well's thought, "Make it of something he cannot bite. He can't bite what is given freely without the shape of return." "Take my laughter," Astrid said, and the words tasted like leaving a house in a hurry. Einar's head snapped toward her. "Astrid." "My laughter," she said, firmer. "Bind it into the thread. Let it be the thing he can pull and never finish, because laughter begins where it ends. Let it be a circle he cannot close." The between approved in that precise, severe way it has when humans accidentally invent a rule worth keeping. The thread brightened until color had to look away. Astrid felt something lift out her chest. Not joy itself. Don't panic. Joy is not that fragile, but the sound joy makes when it realizes it's been seen. It poured into the thread like summer into a jar. The wolf lunged a bite and found himself biting a tomorrow that had already rehearsed its punchline. The thread held. And then, because no victory in this world is allowed to sit alone and feel smug, the price arrived, punctual as winter. Astrid opened her mouth to exhale relief and discovered that the laugh rising in her throat had nowhere to go. It pressed against her teeth and dissolved into a quieter shape that hurt and didn't. She swayed. Einar caught her elbow, steady as a promise that knows it can't be kept and shows up anyway. "Careful," he whispered. "You've given the echo, not the song. You will still be happy." "I know," she said, and discovered that saying "I know" without the lift of a laugh is like walking without swinging your arms. Possible, but you notice the cost. The wolf stopped struggling. His eyes narrowed to slits of winter sun. "Clever," he said. "When this breaks, I will enjoy it more." When Einar muttered, "Everything breaks," the wolf said cheerfully, which is exactly the sort of sunshine you don't need. Some things break into more themselves. He looked at Astrid as one connoisseur looks at another. "We'll speak again, Stitch." Then he stepped backward into his own shadow and was gone, as if departure were a trick he had invented and kept forgetting to patent. Time unpaused like a breath someone remembered to finish. The gull screamed, indignant at the interruption. The spoon clattered into the pot. Jalti yelped at being scalded by a future he had not been briefed on. Freya's knife finished its slice, and the bread fell open like a revelation you were going to have for lunch anyway. People blinked, shook their heads, and resumed moving, feeling the echo of danger the way you feel the sea in your socks hours after you've left it. Astrid stood very still, because moving would admit that she was now a shape, missing a sound. Einar watched her with a grief so careful it could be mistaken for approval. Solveig approached with something between awe and the satisfaction of being right. "You gave him a circle," the old woman said. "Good. Circles are polite traps." "I can't laugh," Astrid said, and it would have been funny in a cruel way if laughter had been available for use. You can, Solveig corrected, but for now your laughter will arrive in other people's mouths. Listen for it, which is both beautiful and deeply inconvenient. 2 words you should embroider on a pillow if you plan to deal with fate regularly. Astrid nodded. Modgud's voice brushed her ear like a border you didn't see until you crossed it. You have spun the first thread. The wolf will test it. Make more. Einar's hand hovered near her shoulder, not touching, exactly the distance between offering and presuming. You did it, he said. For now, she said. He smiled without humor. For now is what the world is made of. Night fell politely, as if asking permission. The green in the sky faded to a bruise and then to just sky, which is relief performing as modesty. The village pretended nothing had happened, because pretending is how people learn to keep going until they truly can. Jalti hummed without knowing his tune had been used to tie a knot in the dark. Freya broke bread and frowned at the crumb as if it could confess. Astrid climbed to the standing stones with Einar, because you can only be brave in public for so long before you need to be brave where no one makes concluding noises. The stones remembered what had happened and did not comment, which is the best kind of witness. Einar sat. Astrid stood, because height sometimes helps the heart believe its math. I tried to say your name, he said into the wind. I know, she answered. Thank you for failing. He laughed for her, and she heard in his mouth the sound that had lived in her chest, now traveling. She felt it circle back, not as sound but as warmth. Not gone. Different. Inconvenient. Beautiful. You see the theme. What now? He asked. Now I learn to spin other parts of myself, she said, before he comes back hungry. And he will, she agreed, and the certainty tasted like iron resolved to be a sunrise. Below them, the sea did its old magic of making the moon look useful. Somewhere far away, a horn practiced less and promised more. Astrid held the spindle loosely, as if it were not a weapon but a biography. She breathed in the air that belonged to everyone and decided which breath would be hers. And in case you were wondering whether our girl just became a legend and can rest, oh, sweet listener, I love your optimism. The wolf has siblings. The green has cousins. The river remembers questions it hasn't been asked yet. And Einar, he has a name he can say only at a cost he hasn't chosen to pay. If you're thinking this would be an excellent moment for fate to knock again, you're right. The raven returned, dropped a second black thread at Astrid's feet, and said one word in a voice like ice promising spring. South, which is where the circle opens into a road. They left before the frost surrendered its last glitter, walking a road that pretended to be ordinary until you noticed how it always bent toward the next necessary thing. South meant less pine and more heather. Fewer cliffs scowling at the sea and more long beaches where the tide wrote gossip and foam and erased it out of politeness. The raven flew ahead, not a guide so much as a punctuation mark. Every time Astrid thought of home, her feet tried to turn of their own accord. Einar let the silence do the talking, which is unusual for him and therefore suspicious. The spindle rode at Astrid's hip, warming when a choice hid under a bush and cooling when a danger decided to be obvious. They reached a stretch of shore where the wind tasted like old iron and distant fire. Nets hung from poles like tired flags. A handful of boats sulked on their bellies, patched so many times they were more story than wood. Children watched the strangers arrive with the fearless curiosity of people who have learned fear already has their address. A woman stood up from mending and gave them the kind of once-over that checked for weapons, secrets, and whether you eat with your mouth closed. "You're late," she said, which is an excellent opening line when you haven't met. "Terribly sorry," Einar answered, as if apologizing to fate were a daily chore. "What did we miss?" "The sea forgot how to be generous," the woman said. Then it remembered how to be cruel. Astrid felt the threat of it, a pull beneath the surface, like a promise trying to become hunger. The woman's name was Signa, which is the sort of name that already has opinions about storms. She fed them fish that had the decency to be bony and a bread whose best quality was sincerity. While they ate, people pretended not to move closer. Signa's daughter, a stick-legged girl with a ribbon scarred her lip, Stare at the spindle the way you stare at a knife you wish were a spoon. What happened? Astrid asked. First the fish came too many, Signa said. Then none at all. Then the sea took Eric. Took, as in, Signa said, and looked toward the water in that old way that is half love, half complaint. He stepped out to set a line, and the shore forgot where to stop. Astrid swallowed and tasted salt that hadn't come from a fish. The raven hopped along the table and stole a crumb with professional indifference. Einar watched the tide. He does this like other men watch dice, looking for the moment luck clears its throat. There, he said after a while, pointing to the line where the sea dimmed. Do you see the weave? Astrid saw it once he said it, the faintest shimmer, as if the water were a veil someone had spun from words the sea wasn't meant to wear. Who could bind the shoreline? She asked, equal parts impressed and offended. The one who owns what drowning becomes, Signa said, crossing herself with a gesture that wasn't a cross and wasn't not. Ron. Yes, that Ron. Queen of what is loss of water. Keeper of nets you hope never snag your name. In the north we sing about her the way people in other lands flirt with their fears. Prettily, quickly, with an exit planned. Why would Ron close her fist? Astrid asked. Det, Einar said. She is old and fair, but her fairness tastes like tides. Astrid rose, because the answer to a seal thing is rarely patience. She walked to the edge where the sea made its argument and put the spindle into her palm as if asking it whether it wanted to be brave. It warmed, which is spindle for yes. The wind pulled her hair into a halo of bad decisions. She called without words, which is to say she set her intention at the exact height of prayer and threw it like a stone across water. The sea answered as a woman. Of course it did. She stood where the depth begins and wore a gown of green, so dark it argued with being called green at all. Her hair was the color of night learning to move. She smiled like a breaker that looks harmless and isn't. Child, she said, which is what all the old powers call you when they think will make you careful, why do you tug at my net? Because you took Eric, Astrid said, and because the fish have learned to fear their own road. Men build boats and call it courage, Ron replied. Then they hate me for keeping their endings tidy. Do not ask the sea to be less honest than land. Astrid could have argued. She could have told the queen she had seen greed wear a shoreline like a crown and call a harvest. She could have said mercy is also a tide, but what you say to a queen is rarely as useful as what you offer. She touched the spindle, thought of the first thread, her laughter given into a circle, and felt the absence like a new organ. I'll pay a debt, she said, for a village that doesn't owe you. Ron cocked her head, intrigued by audacity the way cats are intrigued by curtains. What will you pay with little spinner? Fear, Astrid said, and Einar made that particular sound he makes when he wants to revise the plan but respects the narrative too much to interfere. Astrid swallowed. Not to give to you, she added. To give up. Ron's smile deepened. Which one? This is a problem with fear. You don't have one. You have a drawer full of them, labeled badly. Astrid considered each. Fear of losing her parents. Fear of failing the village. Fear of discovering the wolf had enjoyed their conversation more than she did. Fear of Einar's name being something she couldn't afford. She touched the one that had always lurked just out of sight. Fear of being ordinary when the gods were finished borrowing her. That one, she said, and the air took note. Spun into what? Ron asked. A second thread, Astrid whispered. She lifted the spindle. It took more effort this time, as if thread hates forming out of anything but fiber and a stubborn heart. But fear unraveled willingly once named. It came apart like smoke. Astrid spun it into a line that gleamed dull as pewter, humming with the negative of a scream. She offered across the foam. Ron took it as one takes a new kind of knife, admiring the edge. You pay, Ron said, and I open. She raised her hand, and the shimmer line dissolved, not with drama, but with the quiet of a gate that had always been ornamental. The sea resumed breathing in its old rhythm. Fish showed themselves like children deciding to trust again. Somewhere behind them, Signa exhaled a decade's worth of waiting, and did not notice she had done it. Eric, Astrid asked, because hope is the most impolite thing to bring to a queen. Kept, Ron said. He liked my halls. He sings well. Don't make that face. Your fear paid for the living, not the dead. Astrid let the disappointment sit. Some prices are precise, and precision is a mercy we hate. Ron began to fade like fog, remembering it had errands. He will come for your new thread, she said as if commenting on the weather. The wolf? Astrid asked. Of course the wolf. Of course. He eats the ends of things, Ron said. He will study this one like homework. You cannot keep paying with pieces you need. She tilted her head toward Einar, eyes glittering with a different appetite. And you cannot keep traveling with a secret shaped like a man and expect secrets not to multiply. I don't, Astrid began, and then did not lie. I know. Ron was gone. The tide came up as if to erase her footsteps, then thought better of it. Astrid stood very still until Einar's presence warmed the air like a small, polite fire. Fear, he asked. I don't want to be small when this is over, Astrid said, forgetting to dress it in cleverness. I don't want to be a story someone tells about someone else. That fear protected you, Einar said. Now it can protect someone else. Or it can leave a space something worse will try to rent, Astrid answered. Because once you start bargaining with yourself, you become very good at reading the fine print. They stayed with Signa's people for 2 nights, during which Astrid learned that when you give up a fear, the world assumes you've given up all of them. Children asked for rides on her back as if she were an elk. Men offered to show her the worst knots they'd ever tied. Signa herself asked whether Astrid could spend time to ripen the apples faster, and when Astrid said no, Signa said pity, as if thwarting winter had been the plan for the afternoon. The raven slept by the hearth with one eye open, which is a habit he didn't invent but has perfected. On the 3rd dawn, a woman arrived by the path with a sword she carried like an apology. She was tall, not giantess tall, but you will make room tall, and she wore scars like map lines earned by refusing to be a landmark. She nodded to Signa, nodded to Einar as if trying to place his face in a gallery of trouble, and looked at Astrid. I'm Bryn, she said, then added what truly mattered. I've had enough of waiting. You might think this is a part where we recruit her with a rousing speech and a montage, but Bryn joined the usual Nordic fashion. She sat down, ate bread like it was trespassing, and began mending a strap that didn't need mending to show she knew how. The green in the sky reached my village, she said without being asked. The sheep stared at it until they forgot their names. That isn't metaphor. We had to rename them. Do you know how hard it is to rename a sheep? They hold grudges. She looked at Astrid again. You're building a rope. A net, Astrid said, thinking of Ron's smile. Or both. I'm not much with thread, Bryn said, but I can hold things that don't want to be held. Einar's mouth tilted. Useful hobby. Useful life, Bryn corrected. And that's how you know someone's coming along. The way they edit you. They traveled south together, a trio that looked like the beginning of a joke, a spinner, a wanderer, and a warrior walking into the world. Except no one was laughing yet, and Astrid, you'll recall, had outsourced her laugh. The land changed the way a face changes when it remembers a pain. Subtly at first, then all at once. Creeks ran in circles because the hill had forgotten which way was down. Houses leaned away from empty air as if it had ideas. People slept at midday and worked at night because the sun had acquired an inconvenient habit of pausing where it didn't belong. Astrid felt the wolf's influence, like a draft through a door someone won't admit is open. They reached a market town that had been tidy enough to impress a god, and now looked like it had started arguing with its own map. Stalls sold things that didn't go together. Heated stones to roll over the heart, so it would remember to beat, jars of silence for preserving, cinnamon sticks brought up from places that don't consider our gods their business. The folk here had the hard politeness of people who will not waste a stranger, either as danger or as hope. At the square center, a ring of chalk marked off space no one dared step in. Within it sat a boy with a coin balance on his knee and a look in his eyes like someone listening for a train that hasn't been invented. His mother counted quietly, without using numbers. A man with a judge's beard held a book open to the same page over and over, as if repetition could be law. A woman with a healer's hands kept pressing her palm to the boy's brow and flinching as though she touched snow. "What is it?" Astrid asked. "The coin won't fall," The Judge Beard said, grateful to explain a mystery to someone new, as people always are. It's been an hour. The boy breathed out and forgot to let breath in. The air forgot to finish its job. Astrid watched the coin. It trembled minutely, the way hope does when it performs in public. She felt for not holding it up and found not rope, not spell, but a pause sharpened into a blade. The wolf's taste again. Test the ends. Enjoy the middle suffering. She reached for the spindle and found, to her annoyance, that this wasn't a problem for thread. This was a problem for attention. She sat in the chalk ring, much to the collective inhale of every bystander, and put her face near the boy's. "Do you hear me?" she asked softly. He didn't. His eyes were fixed on something that wasn't a thing. Astrid remembered Ron asking which fear. She remembered Modgud's voice speaking in exact verbs. She remembered the Wells thought, "He'll come for what you love first." Love isn't just people. Sometimes it's the trust that the next breath will nominate itself. "You can put it down," she told the boy. "The coin. You can let it fall." "I'll break it," the boy whispered, and the whole square flinched because the whisper sounded like a door sliding shut. "You'll make 2 coins," Astrid answered, "which is more than you started with." The coin fell. It was a small sound, barely worth remarking, and everyone cried like thunder had returned from war. The boy gasped greedily at air. He had decided not to betray. His mother collapsed and then stood up immediately to pretend she hadn't. Astrid let the relief pass through, without clinging. She had the uncomfortable feeling of being watched by something that respected her enough to plan better next time. "Who are you?" the Judge Beard asked, the friendly way bureaucrats asked before inventing a new form. "Passing," Einar said, smiling. "Very briefly your problem, and soon someone else's." "Payment?" the healer asked, because healers know debts as well as queens. "Tell a story where I did not fix anything," Astrid said before Einar could make it charming. "Tell it to your children. Let them learn the shape of helping without a hero to point at." The healer nodded gravely. "That is expensive," she said, and agreed to pay it. They left the town with a satchel of bread that refused to go stale as fast as bread insists it must. South again, the raven now flying lower, occasionally pecking at Bryn's braid for reasons of his own. At dusk they found a standing stone half toppled and propped against a tree, as if too proud to admit napping. Carved into it was a rune Astrid didn't know, and Einar pretended not to. Bryn ran her fingers over it like the cheek of a sleeping friend. "This is where we wait," she said, and none of them asked who told her. Night arrived dressed as a guest who doesn't bring wine, but tells the best stories. The fire made promises it couldn't keep. Astrid dozed and woke to Einar murmuring to the raven, which is not a sentence most people get to overhear. "You're early," he whispered. "Necessary," the raven said, which is ravens for don't make me explain. "Does he know?" Einar asked. And by he we mean the one-eyed man who frowns in people's dreams and weighs laughter against feathers. The raven made the non-committal sound of a messenger who didn't sign up for politics and ended up with a seat at the council. Astrid opened her eyes. "Does who know what?" Einar didn't startle. He's trained his guilt to be subtle. "That you're building a net he didn't order," he said. "That your price is yours to set." "And you," she asked, Does the name you are when you're alone approve?" He met her gaze, and there was again the sense of a border that moved when you looked at it. "Approval is above my pay grade," he said lightly. "But I'm here," which is not approval, but sometimes better. Before dawn the earth shivered the way a horse shivers when flies lie. Bryn woke first and stood, sword low and ready. Astrid felt the spindle heat against her palm and knew a new test had found its shoes. From the darkness between trees stepped a woman, not made of water this time, but of shadow and ember. She wore smoke like jewelry. Firelight walked politely around her instead of through. She smiled, and the smile hurt to see because it knew too much. "Hello, Stitch," she said. "I've come to take the thread you made from fear. I promise to use it for something beautiful." Astrid gripped the spindle. "Who asks?" "Someone who has chewed on endings long enough to appreciate beginnings," she said, which, yes, is not an answer. "Someone who will offer you a trade that sounds clever and is." "I don't give threads already in use." Astrid said. Then I'll take something you haven't spun yet, the woman answered, too gentle. Your patience, perhaps, or your mercy. Bryn shifted, the sort of shift that persuades ideas to reconsider. No. The woman glanced at Bryn with pleasure, as collectors glance at an unexpected piece. Oh, I will have yours later, she said amiably. You hold things that don't want to be held, including yourself. Einar stepped forward, not between them. He is never so obvious, but at an angle that biased the world. She trades fair, he said to Astrid quietly, but she has a different definition of fair every minute. Refuse nicely. If you refuse rudely, she will admire you and not forget it. You don't want either. Astrid breathed. She had given her laughter to the first thread and spun her fear into the second. She could feel a third forming, hungry for shape, not a virtue this time, a debt she owed herself. She looked at the woman of ember and shadow and said, I will not trade tonight, but I will promise you a share of what I weave from sorrow when I've made it. Not the sorrow itself, the strength it hides. The woman's eyes brightened as if fed. A tithe, she murmured, of resilience. How fashionable. Very well. I will come for it when you have enough to give without limping. She stepped back into her own absence with the elegance of smoke changing its mind. Hurry, little spinner, she called before vanishing. The wolf has already found your second thread. He is licking it like sugar. Bryn sat, exhaling like a forge cooling. I do not like her, she observed. Good, Einar said. That's mutual. Astrid stared into the fire until the flames dismissed her as unproductive. She could feel it. Far north, in the village where bread was still bread and gold still democratic, the wolf testing the pewter thread of her surrender. He would worry it, worry her, worry the space around her, until something admitted needing to be more than it was. We have to keep moving, she said. South, the raven agreed. To whom? Bryn asked, practical as flint. To the one who taught the first cat how to step without sound. Einar answered, and if you just felt an uncomfortable thrill at that, same. Cats and silence? That old combination that made the first binding possible? Yes, we're visiting the place where impossible materials are collected like gossip. Astrid lay down again and pretended sleep was a choice. Her heart counted the beats between waves. The spindle cooled under her palm, not because danger had left, but because it had made itself at home. She dreamed of a hall where no door creaked and a woman cutting strands from silence as if silence were cloth. She woke with a word in her mouth that wasn't a word. We could end here, neatly, but neatness is for knives and sermons. As dawn arrived with the modesty of someone who knocks, a distant horn answered itself, and the green scar in the sky returned, thinner now but more insistent, like a thought you try not to have. Somewhere behind them, the wolf smiled at the second thread and pretended not to be impressed. Somewhere ahead, the place that harvests the roots of mountains and the breath of fish waited to see what new impossibility Astrid would dare to ask for. And yes, dear listener, before you request a break, there won't be one. Fate likes a marathon. Pack water. South is a direction, but it's also a decision you keep making every time the road offers you a kinder lie. They passed hills that leaned against each other like tired elders, groves where the wind rehearsed a lullaby it wouldn't admit to knowing, rivers that doubled back to check whether they'd been understood. Bryn walked with the patience of a whetstone. Einar walked like a man escorting a rumor he liked too much. Astrid walked with the spindle warm against her hip and the sense, growing inconvenient, that she now carried a small, private horizon wherever she went. You know how sometimes the forest goes quiet in a way that isn't warning, just courtesy? That's how the place found them. Courtesy thick enough to hear. Birds tucked their songs behind their tongues. The raven folded his voice into his feathers like a note in a pocket. Even the sea, far off, agreed to breathe more softly. The trees thinned. The ground remembered how to be smooth. Ahead lay a hall whose roof was night without stars, not a darkness of absence, but a darkness of attention. It didn't block the world so much as ask it to calm down. Bryn stopped at the threshold because even bravery has manners. We're here, she said, which is sometimes all a door is waiting to hear. No hinges moved. The hall just allowed them. Inside, sound behaved. Boots didn't scuff. Cloth didn't whisper. Fire burned without gossip. A cat the size of a secret paced the lintel with deliberate pause. Its fur drank light. Its whiskers measured air the way cartographers measure coastline. Patiently, with a taste for paradox. Astrid didn't reach for it, because even children in stories know better. Einar bowed to the cat with sincerity that made Bryn glance at him sideways. Old friend, old employer, Einar mouthed, which is a kind of disclosure you file away for later. A woman stepped from behind a pillar that might have been a shadow or a rule. She wore silence like linen. Her hair was braided with pauses that made your heart keep time better. When she smiled, you remembered how often noise is a disguise for fear. Welcome, she said, and even her welcome made less sound than most people's apologies. I keep what keeps things from breaking when the world forgets to hush. I am Hlee. If you just felt every lullaby your mother ever hummed sit up straighter. Yes, that Hlee, the one whose name is a shelter in a storm and a hand over a startled mouth. Astrid bowed with the awkward reverence of someone who mostly likes life loud. I need to make a third thread, she said, to hold what the wolf can't simply bully. Hlee glanced at the spindle. Her eyes warmed. You have already given laughter to a circle and fear to a gate. Good work. Untidy, but all good work is untidy. This one must be woven from sorrow. Astrid had been expecting that. Not happily, but thoroughly. If I must give it, must I also lose it? Not lose, Hlee said, crossing the hall with steps that left the floor a little calmer. Transform. Sorrow is as necessary as salt. Without it, nothing keeps. Bryn let out a breath she'd been storing for years. Einar looked mildly, unhelpfully relieved. The cat leapt down and threaded himself around Astrid's shins with the gravity of a priest. He sat, watched, refused to purr. Purring is for after. What do I need? Astrid asked. Ingredients, Hlee said, amused at the way mortals like recipes. Not the ones the old rope required. We're done counting what never was. Bring me the shadow between two blinks when someone chooses not to cry. Bring me the pause between a wave's arrival and its apology. Bring me the warmth in a hand that kept holding after the news got bad. Bring me the first word of an apology that took years to finish. Bring me a tear that didn't fall, because there was work to do. I don't carry other people's tears, Astrid said, stubborn in the correct direction. You don't, Hlee agreed, but you carry yours. And people like you always volunteer be plural. The hall opened like a patient teacher's palm. It did not move, and yet there were places to go. Astrid walked a corridor whose walls were her own history, cleverly disguised as someone else's. She passed the day the midwife set her in her mother's arms and called her a soft curse and a blessing in the same breath. She passed the winter after the fever when she realized she kept breathing out of habit and decided habit was heroic. She passed a year where she laughed loudly because it was cheaper than telling the truth about how badly she wanted to be asked to stay. Each memory set a small cup on a ledge. Astrid tipped the not-quite tears she'd saved at the time into the vessel now, and the hall said thank you by being easier to stand in. At the end of the corridor waited her parents, not as ghosts or visions, but as presents. The way the scent of bread is presence. Her father hummed, naturally, a note that remembered boat ribs and girl spines. Her mother's hands were dough and judgment, in that order. I'm not here to borrow you, Astrid said, ashamed of how often asking had made her heroic, and then left her home exhausted. I'm here to admit I can't live without you, and to live without you anyway if I must. That's my girl, Freya said wearily, which is a mother's blessing disguised as complaint. Jalti put something in her palm. Warm, heavy, ordinary. A smooth stone from the river near the shipyard, with a shallow thumbprint worn by 3 generations of thinking. For when you need to press something that won't press back, he said. Astrid blinked and took the shadow between those blinks. Because Hlee had told her to. She added it to a pouch that somehow had been there all along. The cat appeared beside her without making a suggestion of sound, and guided her back to the main hall. Bryn and Einar had been busy in the way people are busy when they can't help and try to be useful without touching the wrong lever. Bryn had rearranged a pile of kindling by thinking at it. Einar had befriended an empty chair and made it look more confident. Lee waited at a table where tools rested. A needle carved from moonlight that wasn't in the mood to be noticed, a comb for thoughts, a shuttle for carrying what cannot be carried. What else? Astrid asked. Lee tapped the table gently, and the table remembered an ocean, the pause between the wave and the return. They went to the shore behind the hall, where the sea had agreed to take turns. Astrid stood exactly where her toes would be wet and waited. The wave arrived, roared, laid its argument on her feet, and stalled just the smallest fraction, the exact length required for memory to set ink. Astrid cupped the air of that pause and put it in the pouch. It weighed what a held breath weighs. Enough to notice, not enough to carry without caring. Warmth in a hand that kept holding, Lee said. Bryn reached without asking and took Astrid's fingers in hers. She squeezed until bones negotiated. Bryn's hands were scar maps and oath anchors, and soft at the heel where softness means mercy won a fight. Astrid felt a heat there like the stove's secret heart. She gathered it. No theft, a borrowing, set beside the pause and the blink shadow. Bryn blinked once with both eyes, the slow kind that means yes. The first word of a late apology. Lee said. Astrid thought a yard where she had refused to forgive a girl who'd broken her comb on purpose. Years later, she'd avoided the girl's wedding because the comb still felt like a law. She found herself at that doorway now, invisible, listening to her younger mouth prepare a sentence it never allowed. She began, and Astrid caught the I, not as permission but as material. It pressed in her hand like a seed that would sprout whatever you planted near it. A tear that didn't fall, Lee said last. Astrid did not have to look far. She put her palm over her chest, and the body told on itself. The tear rose, remembered it had a job, and stayed. Astrid lifted the warmth of it anyway, the way you lift a sleeping child without waking everything they are. Her pouch became a small gravity. Back at the table, Lee placed the tools like a surgeon arranging inevitabilities. You'll spin, she said. I'll steady. He'll, she nodded at Einar. Leave the thread alone unless asked. Einar lifted both hands, palms out, mischief holstered. Bryn set her sword across her knees and became the kind of stillness that makes predators think twice. Astrid set the spindle in motion. The iron drank the not-quite things, the almost and afters and almost wers. The thread appeared pale as dawn grief, strong as a thing that stands up anyway. It hummed with a compassion that didn't ask to be thanked. Lee guided, not touching, the way a midwife guides a breath. The cat watched one paw lift, hover, lower, a priest giving benediction to a string. Name it, Lee said softly. Astrid wanted to say resilience because everyone says resilience now as if the word had invented spines. She wanted to say endurance, but endurance is a cousin who often overstays. What came instead was a word that tasted like bread placed in someone else's hand while you're still hungry. Keep, she said, surprised. Let this be the keep thread. The keeping that holds after the breaking. The part that keeps. The thread steadied, glad to know how to be called. Astrid wounded, not on the spindle now, but on the stone her father had given her. The groove took it like it had been waiting for a job more serious than pockets. The hall exhaled in a way halls exhale when something new has been made that isn't a mistake. Leah's shoulders loosened one finger's worth. Good, she said. Now pay. Of course. There is always afterward. Lee did not itemize. She simply looked at Astrid with the kind of gentleness that warns. Astrid felt in herself the cost rummaging around politely for a seat. She braced for a subtraction, of memory, of sweetness, of one of those quiet competencies we only notice missing. It wasn't subtraction. It was division by sharing. The third thread didn't take anything away. It asked to be tethered to a story she had not yet told herself about the day after. The price was to live as if the day after were real. In practical terms, that meant no striking bargains that assumed catastrophe as a shortcut to meaning. No building identity from ashes when there were fields to plant. It's a cost that sounds like a sermon, but feels like work. Astrid nodded. I'll pay it. Good girl. Lee said, which is what gods sometimes call you when they agree to treat you as a colleague. She touched Astrid's brow, and Hall briefly learned how to remember sunlight without needing windows. You felt it, didn't you? The tug to check north, to see whether the wolf was already licking this third thread with a scholar's appetite. He was far away, in a village where a gull's insult schedule had resumed. A shadow moved along a threshold and tested a new line stretched invisibly through human habit. The pewter thread of surrendered fear thrummed. The circle thread of laughter held. The keep thread, fresh, unseasoned, sang a note the wolf hadn't heard in an age and made him tilt his head like a puzzle that promised flavor. Bryn's hand tightened on her sword. Einar blinked, and the kind of smile he wore when pleased with someone else's rebellion reached the corners of his mouth. The raven hopped onto the table, pecked a stone spool, and did something he almost never does. He spoke an entire sentence. "He is not alone," the raven said. "The green has a mouth." "Of course it does," Einar sighed. "Bad ideas always grow faces." Lee listened to a silence only she could hear, then fixed Astrid with a glance that contained both warning and pride. "You will need more than thread. You will need hands that know how to catch. You will need names, yours among them. And you will need to decide whether the one beside you is a guide with a secret or a secret disguised as a guide." "You could simply tell me," Astrid said, not unkindly, to Einar. "I could," he said, not unkindly, to Astrid. "But then the thread you're making out of yourself wouldn't fit the knot you're heading toward, which is either wisdom or mischief or both. And if you've been listening, you know the answer is yes." They thanked Lee, the way people thank shelter after they've remembered what roofs are for. The cat escorted them to the threshold and finally, briefly, purred. Outside, day waited with its working clothes on. The hall folded itself back into the landscape with the grace of a bed made by someone who loves you. They walked until the air decided to carry rumor faster. On a ridge, they looked back. Yes, she keeps doing that, and saw a thin seam of green riding itself across the northern sky again. Not a wound now. A mouth, as a raven had said, opening and closing as if tasting vowels. Bryn spat the way warriors spit, when spells try to act confident. "West," she said unprompted, surprising herself. The raven dropped a third black thread at Astrid's feet. This one was shorter than the others and warmer. On it, runes shimmered in a sequence that made Einar wince. They arranged themselves into one word. West. Astrid tied the black thread around her wrist. It tightened with the friendliness of a bracelet that promises to become a shackle only if you lie to it. She looked at her companions, then at the line between here and the map's untidy edge. "We go," she said. "Of course we do," Einar replied, rolling his shoulders like a man preparing to introduce two enemies who are accidentally cousins. Bryn checked the spine of her sword and said nothing, which is approval made of steel. The spindle warmed, agreement. The keep thread hummed, promise. Somewhere north, the wolf practiced patience. Somewhere west, something older than hunger sharpened its manners. And above them, for a heartbeat you might have imagined, the sky considered laughing and settled for a thin smile. West was a rumor, made into a road. The wind argued with itself across the moor, and the grass answered in one long sentence that meant keep going. Astrid walked with the spindle warm against her hip, the keep thread coiled on her father's stone, the circle thread of laughter glowing faintly like a lantern under a coat, the pewter thread of surrendered fear humming like a gate that knows its job. Bryn paced slightly ahead, chin set, sword slung, loyal and loaded like a vow. Einar, as always, escorted trouble with the ease of a man who suspects he had a hand in sending the invitation. The raven rode currents invisible to everyone else, a punctuation mark searching for the right clause. The green mouth in the sky yawned wider each dusk. People pretended to call it aurora. No one likes admitting the heavens might be learning to speak. You would think a glowing mouth would be reassuring. Look, at least we know where to address our complaints. But this one practiced consonants only hunger enjoys. Farmers set bowls of milk on fence posts the way their great-grandmothers had, hedging bets no one would admit placing. Babies woke laughing for no reason, and then refused to laugh for 3 days. Dogs sat with their backs to doors. The old gods kept their altars tidy, and their opinions unannounced. They reached a spit of black rock that pointed seaward like a warning finger. On its tip stood a cairn ringed with gull feathers and a bronze disc etched with a rune that pretended to be decorative. Einar tilted his head, listening to a silence that had seniority. "She's here," he said. "Would she?" Bryn asked, as if ready to argue with all of them in alphabetical order. "The one who keeps the roots of mountains in a jar," he said lightly, "and borrows fish breath when she needs to sew the horizon shut. Ah, there are names. Even ravens prefer to spell with wing beats instead of vowels, because once you print a name on the day, it starts cashing checks." The rock exhaled. The sea gathered itself into a shape that war pearls made from other people's decisions. She stepped onto the spit with the courtesy of a tide arriving on time. "Not Ron. We met Ron already." This one carried a net strung with impossible fibers. A shoal of never were glinting like odes. She tapped the bronze disc with her toe, and the rune reorganized itself into attention. "You're late," she said, which is apparently the preferred greeting for immortals with schedules. "We stopped to save a boy from a coin," Einar replied, as if this were a normal sentence. "Astrid," the woman said without looking away from Einar. "You've spun 3? He has not told you why that matters to him more than it should." Astrid, who had promised herself not to flinch at prophecy the way people flinch at soup that's about to boil over, kept her face calm. "I'll learn," she said. "Oh, you will," the woman said, amused in a way of someone who remembers being mortal long enough to enjoy watching clever children choose their own homework. "I am net mother to the uncountable. I keep a cupboard of impossibilities for when the world runs out of excuses." "Convenient," Bryn said, sincerity edged. "I prefer necessary," Netmother answered. "You've come for a stitch that can bite back." "We've come to stop the mouth," Astrid said, looking at the green seam above the world. "And the wolf who tutors in hunger." Netmother made a noise like a wave that has read the ending and disagrees. "The mouth is not a student. It is a memory. Once, the sky had too much to say. The old ones gag it with stories, so we could hear ourselves think. Your wolf has gnawed the gag loose. He's not evil. He's a function. The trouble with functions is they don't get bored. So we give him a new job," Einar said. "We reassign his hunger." Netmother turned to him fully for the first time. If looks were shears, this one cut arrogance to a sensible length. "And there it is," she said. "Your specialty." Astrid did not ask, "Do I want to know his specialty?" She already did. Einar's gift was to bias the world, to nudge consequences into different neighbors, to talk a flood into becoming rain. Good in a pinch. Dangerous when you forget pinches are rare and consequences are social. "What do you require?" Astrid asked, moving us along, because drama ages badly in direct sunlight. "A hose," Netmother said. "A place to anchor what cannot hold still. Your threads need a frame. We will build you a loom out of thunder." "Whose?" Bryn asked reflexively, protective of skies no one had assigned her. "Whose, do you think?" Netmother smiled, and the horizon took one nervous step back. The air thickened like stew that got ideas. Wind rose, remembered the choreography from last time, and danced itself into lines. The sea hummed. Far inland, mountains cleared their throats. And then, no, not lightning yet. First, goats. 2 of them, indignant, dragging a chariot that had absolutely not been designed with their preferences in mind. The man who stepped down wore, whether like a second opinion. His beard could have built a house if it felt like it. He did not need an introduction, but the narrator will give you a brief one anyway, because manners. Thunder tastes like iron, because he made it so. "Who calls?" he asked, and every gull decided to audition for silence. "Borrow," Netmother said before Astrid could answer, because when you negotiate with storms, you lead with a verb you like the day to remember. "Borrow," he repeated, tasting the word like a joke that might be a compliment. His eyes found Astrid. They softened the way a cliff softens, subtly, dangerously. "Little Stitch," he said, "and if you're counting, yes, that makes 3 powerful beings who use the same nickname. When the cosmos repeats itself. Take notes. You tied a knot in the green and taught the wolf to respect the circle. What would you make me?" "A frame," Astrid said, and the audacity did not feel like audacity. It felt like reaching for a pot lid without checking if it's hot. A loom to hold 3 living threads. Not forever. Long enough. Einar held very still. Bryn's hand hovered over her sword, which would be as useful against a god as a stern look is against a tide. Thunder frowned the way men frown when they are deciding whether to be pleased. What will you pay? Not flattery, Astrid said. You have enough. She took the stone her father had given her, the groove bright with keep thread, and pressed it to her own sternum until it hurt enough to name. I'll pay with steadiness. Mine. I will not falter while the loom holds, even if I want to. He grinned. The weather improved reluctantly. Good. I'm bored of brilliant people who faint at the interesting part. He clapped his hands. The sound made history tidy. Wind braided itself into pillars. Rain hung from the sky in strings and waited for instruction. Net Mother cast her impossibles into a grid only she could see. The chariot goats rolled their eyes, which is how goats vote. Now, if you've never seen a loom made of thunder, imagine scaffolding built from the arguments lightning has with air, pinned together by the brief humility of a cloud. Net Mother tied the grid to it. The frame hummed with scale. The raven sat on the highest spar like punctuation at the end of a command. Bryn braced the base with her back, and both heels dug into basalt. Einar placed his palms on the side beams and tilted the world a fraction, the way you tilt a recipe, so the batter finds the pan. Astrid, Net Mother said, Weave. The circle thread of laughter went first, bright, quick, disobedient in the useful way. Astrid shot it through the warp and felt the pleasant shock of a missing piece choosing a job. The pewter thread of surrendered fear followed. Steady, deliberate, a gatekeeper with a well-run ledger. Last came the keep thread, the one that asked after the day after. It moved slow and firm, the way hands move when they pick up someone who weighs exactly as much as grief. The mouth in the sky noticed. It opened wider, tasting vowels it had not been allowed to pronounce in centuries. The wolf noticed, too, far north. He stood at the edge of a field where wheat had agreed to be gold and lifted his nose to the south wind as though it carried a rumor. Good, he said to no one, and began to walk where the map forgot to emphasize distance. Hold, Net Mother said, and thunder obliged. Astrid felt the price arrive. Not subtraction this time. Multiplication. All the parts of herself she had volunteered for thread pulled taut, and asked for more of her to be made. She became sturdy at speed. Her breath found a slower gear. Her heart learned to count in rope. Somewhere in the middle of all that, she wanted to scream. She didn't. She set her teeth and smiled with her eyes. And then the sky bit back. Green light spilled downward in a sheet. It struck the loom and tested it like a skilled thief tests a lock. Confident, patient, amused. The frame shook. Bryn slid a boot an inch and made the earth remember its job. Einar's jaw set. A crack formed where the thunder pillars crossed, and Astrid felt it like a paper cut on a thought she needed later. Now would be a splendid moment for your specialty, she told Einar through her teeth. My specialty, he said softly, has a consequence you deserve to choose. Choose later, Bryn grunted. Live now. The green discovered consonants. It spoke a sound that hit the body before the ear. Babies in far villages hiccuped. Old men forgot the moral of their best stories. The raven swore in wing. Net Mother threw an armful of neverwhere into the tear and slowed at a breath. He's not alone, she warned again, and this time we all heard what she meant. The mouth had cousins, echoes of choices people made and never admitted had cost. The sky remembers. Don't think it doesn't. Einar, Astrid said, and he looked at her like a man choosing between two truths that both deserve to live. I can move the hunger, he said, but to do it cleanly, I must say my real name in the place where the world is listening. And if I do, the listening will not forget. It will start asking me to do this for everything. All the time. Every one small disaster is brought to my door until I cannot be anyone but the man who moves consequences. He shrugged one shoulder. The gesture was almost flippant, almost prayer. In other words, I'll stop being part of the story and become an infrastructure. And if you don't? Bryn asked, never sentimental when math is needed. Then we hold until holding stops meaning anything. Einar said. Astrid did not hesitate. She had been practicing not hesitating since the night 3 women put iron in her cradle. Say it, she said. He smiled the way a man smiles when the door he most fears has the best light behind it. He spoke a name that didn't fit in the air, and so the air made room. The thunder loom sang in a new key. The green paused. Not surrender. Attention. Einar, now properly named, put both hands to the beam and did the thing he was born to do. He asked the hunger to eat what could afford to be eaten. You know how tides pull toward the moon? Imagine hunger learning to prefer a different orbit. The mouth chose story instead of bone. It clamped down on the bragging of men who had fished too many seasons and called it luck. It chewed the needless cruelty of officials who liked the shape of power more than the taste of justice. It swallowed waste, gluttony, and every easy cruelty people mistake for a personality. It bit and bit, and everywhere that pain landed, the loom pulled, redirected, braided the damage into cloth strong enough to carry it. Keep, Astrid whispered, and the third thread glowed like dawn under snow. The wolf arrived, not in a puff, in a pace, as if he had been invited and was too polite to be late. He stepped onto the spit beside the loom and looked at each of them in turn. Net Mother inclined her head, like a teacher acknowledging a difficult student's attendance. Bryn did not move. Predators dislike being ignored, and that is why she is good at ignoring. Einar, named, kept his hands on the beam, eyes on the green. The wolf met Astrid's gaze and did not smile, because respect is a strong narcotic. Stitch, he said, almost fond. You build a throat for the sky. A mouth needs manners, Astrid said. I will bite this, he said conversationally, as if discussing lunch. You will try, she agreed, and that pleased him. He opened his jaw. Astrid threw the keep thread across those teeth, and the circle thread after it. The pewter gate thread cinched at the hinge. The loom boomed. Thunder squared its shoulders. The mouth above their heads tried to make a word, and found that the word had to pass through a weaving first. Meaning arrived with context. Do you know the relief of that? Most havoc is just language without context. The wolf leaned. Thread sang, not with strain. Okay, a little strain, but with thinking, and then the green did what all mouths do when a new taste confuses them. It gagged, like a child discovering mustard, like a tyrant discovering law. It gagged, and in that honest, unattractive moment, Astrid saw the path to the end. Bite this instead, she told the sky, voice calm as iced iron. Bite promises that people made, and then abandoned. Bite the guilt that rots into shame and stinks up the place where repair should grow. Bite waste. Bite vanity. Bite every story that says only one voice matters. If you must eat, eat what we cannot keep. Einar's name worked through the loom, like a key through a city gate. Net Mother cast impossibles into gears. Bryn held the frame with her back and her will, and a lifetime of declining to break. The raven hopped twice and added his own small theology. Never bet against a woman with a spindle and a deadline. The mouth shifted its appetite. The sky chewed. The wolf, surprised and delighted, let out a low sound of appreciation, reserved for worthy puzzles. You have made me useful, he said. Temporarily, Astrid answered, because humility is healthy when bargaining with functions. Temporarily is my favorite duration, he said, and stepped back on the threads. Just enough, not surrender. A gentleman's agreement between predators. The loom held. The green dimmed. Not gone, that would be a lie. Softened. Contoured. The hunger found a job and, being a function, did it well. Far inland, babies laughed again and did not stop. Old men remembered the moral and looked embarrassed. Then they told the story the new way and felt lighter. Fish returned where they could afford to. Judges closed books and opened doors. One man in a market apologized without an audience, and nobody died from it. Thunder unrolled his shoulders. Net Mother gathered her net and fed it a new never-was with protectiveness bordering on smug. Bryn stepped away from the frame and did not let anyone see the stagger. Einar, named, kept his hand on the beam a moment longer, because once you announce yourself to the listening, you owe a graceful exit. Astrid lowered the spindle. Everything in her shook, but inside the shaking stood a stillness she hadn't known before. Not peace, readiness. The kind you get after you've learned that staying is a verb. Payment, Thunder said, mostly because rules are culture. I'll keep my steadiness, Astrid said. You keep your patience. He laughed. The weather took it personally and improved. Deal. Net Mother cocked her head at Einar. And you? I will answer, he said, simple and terrifying. When I must. That is how traps get built, she said. That is also how bridges do, he replied, and the compliment made the day stand up straighter. The wolf looked at Astrid, as if memorizing the weave of her refusal. We'll speak again, he said, when the cloth frays as it must. Bring a needle, she said. He left, not defeated, adjusted. The mouth above closed to a thin, watchful seam. The world remembered how to be loud without shouting. And because consequence travels faster than praise, the first messenger from the north arrived. A girl with kelp in her hair and salt on her knuckles, who had run all night to say one sentence before anyone else could own it. The freeze came, she gasped. Not water, time. It cracked along the bay and stopped at your mother's loaf. Astrid did not wait for permission. Threads coiled. Spindle warmed. Bryn slid into stride. Einar, named, took a breath like a man accepting a public office he never campaigned for. The raven took to air with a curse and a blessing. West had given them a loom. North had remembered it, had feelings. The road turned itself into urgency. And yes, dear listener, we are racing the clock now. The epic has put on its armor. But the heart, oh, that stays soft on purpose. We're not done teaching a mouth manners. We're not done naming a man who tried not to be. We're certainly not done with a girl who builds threads from parts of herself and refuses to run out. Onward. They ran north the way people run when the news is a sentence with no punctuation yet. The coast unspooled under their feet. Bluffs, coves, paths that pretended to be shortcuts and then apologized with bramble. The raven took the lead until the wind became uncooperative and insisted on offering alternative routes. He argued with it the way only an expert can argue with profession. Bryn set a pace that said I can do this forever and meant it. Einar, now properly named, and don't worry, the world remembered, moved with the poise of someone who has just been volunteered by fate to be useful on a national scale. Astrid ran with the spindle warm against her hip and the keep thread humming at her wrist like a vow she'd agreed to without checking the calendar. The seam of green across the sky had thinned, but you don't measure danger only by thickness. It pulsed with the confident etiquette of a predator that has learned which door in your house doesn't latch. Snow arrived in paragraphs, then in footnotes, then in the kind of appendices weather uses when pretend to be done. They passed hamlets where people spoke in whispers because sound had started to echo longer than it should, words returning after supper to ask if you meant them. In one, a woman stirred her stew, and the spoon refused to leave the pot. In another, a windmill turned once an hour and then spent the next 50 minutes reconsidering. The freeze isn't cold, Einar said between breaths. It's a pause that got ambitious. When they crested the ridge above Astrid's village, the world looked like a story interrupted mid-syllable. The sea held itself in the shape of a wave practicing modesty. A gull hung in the air with its beak slightly open, insult half assembled. Smoke rose from the longhouse chimney in a straight line like a sentence that had been told to stand in the corner. And there inside on the board, Freya's loaf, almost through, the knife-kissing crumb, and then changing its mind. Time had cracked along the bay and stopped here, exactly here, like a river diverted by a pebble with ideas. If you're wondering whether Astrid walked straight to the door and fixed it with a speech about mothers and bread, oh, you sweet romantic, you're forgetting how the North prefers its solutions. Earned, threaded, and checked for knots. The moment she stepped across the threshold, the pause pushed back. Her feet landed a fraction slower than her decision. Her heartbeat tried to count by polite intervals. The spindle throbbed in warning. Einar put a hand to the doorframe and nudged, gently, the way you nudge a sleeping ox so it doesn't dream of rolling over. The pressure eased enough to let thought move without getting frostbite. Don't touch the knife, Bryn said, because some rules are so obvious they need saying. She circled the table with a warrior's step tuned down to him. The freeze had a smell, pine, pitch, and old iron, and a little of the sweetness you get when sap decides to stay where it's forever. Astrid reached toward the loaf and felt time nip her fingertips like a territorial fish. Rude, she told it. What is it anchored to? Einar asked the air, which, as you know by now, is not rhetorical when he asks it. The raven landed on the mantel and peered with the authority of a librarian who has seen worse indexing. He clicked his beak. Under, he said. Under meant under. They lifted the floor plank by the hearth. The one Jalti always pretended didn't squeak, which is another way of admitting affection, and found not root, not stone, not vermin, but a coin. Not silver, not gold, a circle of black glass that reflected nothing useful. Stamped with a rune that wasn't exactly a rune. The shape looked like a door pretending to be a mouth. The frieze radiated from it in precise pulses, as if a heart had been replaced with a metronome and told to take itself seriously. Who puts a coin under a hearth? Bryn asked, offended on behalf of domestic sanity. People who want a house to behave. Einar said, people who fear luck is feral. Astrid remembered the boy in the square, and his coin that refused to fall. Hunger taught the sky vowels. Fear taught time to organize. She reached for the spindle and felt the 3 threads answer like different kinds of friends. The circle thread of laughter bright as brass. The pewter thread of fear steady as a guard at a gate. The keep thread warm and stubborn and sure. Not a cut, she said. A weaving. She sat beside the coin and breathed until breath believed her again. She let the pause touch her and didn't flinch. All right, she told it, in the tone bakers use for dough that has opinions. You can stay for a moment, but you cannot be the floor. The keep thread slid over her fingers into a loop around the coin's idea of itself. The circle thread wrapped that loop like a smile that declines to be dismissed. The pewter thread tied it to the doorframe, to the eaves, to the smallest creak in the step that announces you are home even when you're trying to be quiet. Time shivered, grateful and annoyed. The loaf finished its slice. The knife clinked against the board. The gull outside remembered it had something cutting to say and said it with relief. People gasped in different rooms at different times as the pause released them in a chain reaction of resumed chores and interrupted thoughts. Freya's shoulder softened 2 heartbeats after the knife. Jalti's spoon completed its trip in 3, because spoons are philosophers about timing. Astrid turned to her mother and prepared to explain everything in an order that would sound less ridiculous than the truth. Freya beat her to it with the authority of a woman who has lived through worse than metaphors. Wash your hands, she said, then eat. There are healings only bread does. Astrid ate. Her father hummed the 4 notes that built boats and girls, and this time she heard what had always lived under them. The stubborn optimism of a man who has chosen to greet with for decades because greeting, in itself, makes both greeter and greeted more likely to float. He came, Jalti said between notes, not exactly asking. The wolf, Astrid said. Yes. And you? Freya said not a question either. You became louder than your own quiet. It helps, Astrid said unhelpfully, to have a loom made of thunder. Word of the unfreezing traveled the way good news always travels, carried by people who need it to be true for reasons that are none of your business. But along with it came rumor with a colder spine, that the crack in time was not a line but a path. People had seen, in still puddles and paused shadows, other faces looking back, not monsters, not saints, themselves when they were different, lives they had not chosen, griefs they had not paid for yet. The door to below is ajar. The raven sat around a mouthful of somebody else's crumbs. Things are drifting. By the below, we don't mean that hell with pitchfork decor imported from other theologies. We mean the inside way, the road of memory and return, the place where names go to be repaired, and where debts wear their formal clothes. If the crack had opened it, then the next step was obvious in the way cliffs are obvious. I have to go down, Astrid said. Bryn didn't argue, which is how you know it was true. Einar didn't either, which is how you know he wished untruths were available and responsibly priced. Freya pressed a sprig of juniper into Astrid's palm, because some blessings work regardless of what room you're in. Jalti handed her the stone spool with the keep thread wound tight. For when the floor is a suggestion, he said, the door to below isn't a door. It's a familiar place at an unfamiliar hour. For Astrid, it was a path between the standing stones above the cliff. Yes, those stones again, tired of being ignored except when needed, at the time of night when the sea practices invisibility. They went with minimal ceremony. A cloak, a knife, a vow to come back that no one signed. At the first stone, Einar stopped. "There is a tax," he said gently. "Names travel badly downward. You will have to leave yours where you can find it again." Astrid set her jaw and laid her name on the stone as one lays bread on a table before sharing. Carefully, with the hope that it will multiply. She did not speak it. She pressed the shape of it into the grit with her thumb, tracing letters that felt like windows. "Look at me," she told Einar, eyes sharp. "If I forget to be myself, you will remember enough to annoy me back into it." "Gladly," he said, "and if that's not love yet, it's at least its muscle memory." They walked into between below, which smelled like rain rehearsing and tasted like iron debating honey. The path was lit by what had not yet happened. That glow is distinctive. It makes you ache in polite places. The raven refused to fly, not allowed, union rules, and hopped instead with the resentful dignity of a herald forced to wear sensible shoes. Bryn's sword whispered to its scabbard, "Remember, we are tools, not metaphors." The descent wasn't steep. It was thorough. At a bend where the air learned to listen, a woman waited, braiding nothing into a rope just to keep her hands busy. Her eyes were the color of accepting. "You left your name where it can breathe," she said, approving. "Good." Many try to carry it and arrive winded. She didn't introduce herself, because you never get a second chance at a first mystery, but the raven fluffed and spelled it with his wings anyway. Hell, not a terror here, a jurisdiction. The hall behind her went on longer than honesty. It was full of the sounds people make when they finally tell the truth with their whole bodies. "You hold the border," Bryn said, and somehow made it a compliment without losing suspicion. "I host the honest," Hell said. "You've come to collect something you're not sure you lost." Astrid opened her mouth to give our usual charming refusal of destiny, we love those, and found she did not have a better plan. "The Kraken time," she said. "The reflections. They're leaking." Because a question was asked at the river, Hell said, and then asked again at a loom. Threads through water and thunder tug at old fabric. Things slip. She tilted her head. "You're weaving a net that includes sorrow without giving it more seats than joy." "Good. But to stop the leak, you must mend from the underside." Hell led them through rooms that belonged to no architecture and every grief. A child slept peacefully beside a toy that had relearned patience. An old woman sat in the middle of a wide bed and taught her hands to be empty. A fisherman counted his debts in fish and then set down the basket and, for the first time, stopped counting. No one was punished. Everyone was included in their own mathematics. There was a room of mirrors, but only one kind, the sort that reflect you as you are when no roles are in the mood. Astrid faced herself and felt the faint ache where laughter used to live as a resident rather than a traveler. The mirror did not pity her. It admired the vacancy turned into thread. The next room smelled like burnt sugar and decisions. It held a table and, on it, a ledger. Oh, yes, the ledger. Not of sin. Please, leave that other stories, but of imbalance. Every time someone took more future than they could carry. Every time someone paid with a silence that didn't belong to them. Hell set a finger on a line that was clearly Astrid's. "You asked how to keep what keeps you yourself," she said. "You were answered. Now you must have fixed that answer where it cannot be stolen by pause or hunger." "How?" Astrid asked. The spindle hummed, impatient, which was new. Tools get opinions once they've tasted climax. "By remembering a life you lived and forgot on purpose," Hell said casually, "as one does. Bring it to the surface, so it's lessened to your present name. Then the crack will close because the fabric will recognize itself. Memory is not a museum. It's a river that allows diving." Astrid closed her eyes in the hall, thin to a thread she could follow with her hands. She reached into the not quite dark and touched a childhood that wasn't this one, a summer by a different sea, a craft that wasn't ships but songs, a choice to leave someone so they could become what they would not become if she stayed. The goodbye had tasted like salt and iron and mercy, and she had carried its echo as a fear. that being ordinary was all that remained after duty. She brought the memory up like a net heavy with something alive. It thrashed once. Oh, regrets do love theater, and then lay quiet. Stitch, Hell said. Astrid set the memory on the spindle and threaded it through the keep thread, which accepted it with the relief of a loom handed the missing last color. The thread deepened. Its hum found harmony. The crack in time above them flinched. Upstairs, in kitchens and boats and doorways, clocks remembered hours as companions, not bosses. Price. Astrid asked, because you should always ask about price before joy gets excited. Live with both knowings, Hell said. The one where you stayed and the one where you left. Do not choose one to justify the other. Carry them without folding either into a sermon. If you just felt your shoulders tense, same. This is grown-up magic. Astrid nodded, not because it was easy, but because work had become a good word in her mouth. On the way back, the hall offered them a detour. Hell did not forbid it. Boarders know better than to chase curiosity. They passed a small door from which came murmurs that sounded like prayers not addressed to gods. Astrid paused. Einar. He already knew. That amused smile again, the one that hides fatigue from duty. Yes, go. She stepped inside. A bench, a cup of something that remembered warmth, and a man with hair as wild as rumor, whose face felt like a place a story would rest. He looked up as if called by her silence, and, for a moment, all the metaphors in the room froze in respectful attendance. Oh, he said, not surprised, just relieved. There you are. This is a scene where other tales sprint toward romance, and I know, you are rooting for like good citizens of narrative. But this is not that room. This was the room where a different life had been set aside for safekeeping. Astrid sat. The man's hands were inked with the work of someone who writes names for a living. Midwife, judge, witness, scribe. He was not Einar. He was not a rival to Einar. He was a path never walked, a soft, ordinary joy that would have taught her a different bravery. Tending, baking, arguing about the price of salt with the fierceness of someone who knows that dinner is sacred. Astrid loved him then, and there with the love you can feel for the version of yourself who got to be held while the world did not end. I have to go, she said, with neither drama nor apology. He smiled as if she had chosen him anyway, which, in a way, she had. She chose to carry him as proof that woven doesn't mean diminished. She took a thread of that room, no theft, a sacrament, and tied it to her keep thread. The hall approved. Hell inclined her head. Good stitch, she said. And there, a wink from fate that didn't sting. They climbed. Names are lighter on the way up if you remember to breathe with both lungs. At the stone, Astrid pressed her thumb into the grit and lifted her name back into place. It settled like a cloak on cooler air. Einar watched her face rearrange into the version he had met, with a few new rooms added. Welcome back, he said, and meant both parts. Back and welcome. The bait exhaled. The pause cracked once more, a final, petulant pop, and released the last stubborn pockets of stillness. Freya cut bread into slices that looked smug. Jalti hummed a new fifth note, quietly, like a private joke with wood. Villagers emerged with a particular exhaustion of people who had been brave in place. Astrid stood on the cliff among the stones and felt the world take stock. The seam of green overhead had narrowed to a thread, tense as a bow, strung between two corners of the horizon that did not usually admit to having corners. The wolf's attention returned like thunder traveling home along Old Bone. The sky, having learned to swallow shame and waste on command, was ready to object to the new policy with eloquence. And the next thing on our docket, because yes, we're keeping a docket now, was the battle that would not look like a battle until it was nearly over. Bryn flipped her sword once, bored with waiting. When the wolf remembers he likes a challenge, the raven said, which is to say, soon. Einar glanced sideways at Astrid. You took something up, he said. I took a life I didn't live and promised not to treat it like spare parts, she answered. He nodded, pleased and hurting the way newly named men hurt when they hear a choice they respect. Good. We'll need that kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Night arrived early and stayed late. In the dark hours, laughter passed through the village in other people's mouths, and found Astrid's chest warm as a hand by a hearth. She smiled without sound and did not feel poorer. In the morning, the raven landed on her wrist and, without preamble, dropped a fourth black thread. This one was thin, bright, obnoxiously cheerful. On it, runes danced as if they'd been told they were not allowed to dance. South, north, west, yes, yes. This one said east. And along the eastern line of the sky, just where promise pretends its certainty, a sound like fabric tested by teeth rolled toward them, patient as prophecy. The wolf was walking. The mouth was learning new verbs. The loom was ready. And Astrid, our Astrid, stood between and felt none of it choose for her. Time to teach hunger a second lesson. East was not a compass point so much as an invitation to be brave in daylight. They left before the frost could think of a reason to stay, the village watching them with that hush people use when they want to help, and have already done everything that counts. The raven took the lead like a punctuation mark that had finally picked its sentence. Bryn walked with her sword held low, an argument she intended to win politely. Einar, named, kept a hand ready on the air itself, because once you've told the world who you are, it keeps asking for proofs in increasingly theatrical settings. Astrid felt the threads against her skin like three small, insistent heartbeats. Circle, gate, keep. She had not laughed aloud in so long it felt like a story someone else had lived. And yes, she noticed the irony of heading into a fight with hunger while missing her own brightest appetite. As they crossed a headland, the seam of green over the world stretched thinner in the east and also louder, like a harp string someone was determined to pluck into confession. The sea rolled its shoulders and discovered new aches. Seabirds flew lower than their habits allowed and did not apologize. Even the sand stiffened underfoot, the beach deciding it had been trod on enough and would prefer to be considered flooring. They reached the place the raven wanted, a long spit of stone pointing toward a chain of black islands where the water went dark too suddenly. Old fishers never named those rocks. They pointed with their chins and changed the subject. Now the green mouth hovered above them like a wound practicing its vowels, and between the islands walked a figure whose shadow knew the trick of being larger than its source. The wolf did not stalk. He did not creep. He approached with the plain elegance of a function, choosing its next example. "Stitch," he said, when he was near enough of the word to warm the air. No mockery, no tenderness. Recognition, the kind that costs both sides. "Wolf," Astrid returned, "and if you were listening for tremor, you will have to wait for a less useful moment." She held the spindle at her hip the way a singer holds breath, a tool you carry to you, not in your hands. The green mouth above them parted further, tasting sentences, and the tide matched its rhythm, because tides admire commitment. Einar set his palm to the wind and moved it half an inch. Easy nudge, a gentleman's suggestion to the atmosphere that now was not the time to show off. Bryn planted her boots and turned to watch the rocks, not the wolf. Predators hate being outflanked by people who refuse to star in their scene. "I've eaten your fear," the wolf observed mildly, glancing at the pewter thread taut at Astrid's wrist. "It tastes like rules prepared by someone who would rather not make them. I've tested your circle. It returns to itself with irritating charm." This new line. His eyes track to keep thread's quiet glow. This one resists flavor. "That's the point," Astrid said. "It keeps. Everything keeps until it doesn't," the wolf replied with a pleasant pedagogy that would have been comforting if he taught knitting rather than endings. "Let's examine your loom without its thunder." "You'll get neither," Einar said evenly, "and you will enjoy our hospitality regardless." The wolf's gaze slid to him, and if eyes could taste, these tasted memory. "You spoke a name," he said, almost approving. "You stood up when a chair was offered. Dangerous in a different way." "Complain later," Bryn suggested, eyes on the reefs, because a shadow was moving there that had acquired too many elbows not to be a problem. The shadow surfaced to become a ship that had no business floating. Its hull was stitched together from drifted regrets and tar, its sail a page torn from a law book whose ink refused to forgive. A half-dozen men rowed with the dutiful despair of bureaucrats condemned to athletics. At the prow stood a woman whose crown was made of keys that did not open anything anymore. She smiled the way locked doors smile when the locksmith runs out of daylight. "Green's mouth is a choir," she called. "I brought a section." Ah, Einar sighed. The audit. If you've never met the audit, congratulations on a well-defended childhood. She is what happens when order forgets its original purpose and eats its young. Rules are wonderful. Worshipping rules is a hobby for people who fear music. The ship slid closer. The wolf looked amused. Extra teeth at the banquet. The green mouth hummed approval, in a register best appreciated by stone. We'll do this now, then, Astrid said, mostly to herself, because some sentences must be told the shape of their own endings. She set the spindle spinning. No drama, no flourish. The circle thread brightened. The keep thread warmed. The gate thread hummed so evenly you could have timed bread on it. She stepped sideways into the rhythm until the air found it elegant to agree. You're welcome to inspect, she told the audit without looking. But you don't set prices here. Child, the audit smiled, and if you hear child from a function, tighten your bootlaces. Everything has a price. I know, Astrid said. We've been paying all week. She flicked the circle thread across the prow, not as a trap, but as a courtesy rope. If you must tie up, tie here, where damage becomes pattern. The wolf stepped closer, a tide with ideas. Show me the part you made of yourself, he said, meaning the keep thread, meaning the admission that sorrow can be included without becoming the host. Astrid obliged. The keep thread unrolled and passed between his teeth, not as a dare, but as a bridle that refused to humiliate. The wolf bit, lightly, experimentally. Meaning rose under his tongue like a flavor that knows it can't be described. He tasted endurance, but not martyrdom, loyalty, but not ownership, grief that grows gardens instead of statues. He backed up, surprised by the aftertaste. It refuses to end, he said. That is also the point, Astrid said. We have other hobbies besides stopping. The green mouth, impatient with subtleties, descended in a curtain. It pressed on the world in a way lungs resent. Waves bowed involuntarily. The audit ship lifted on a swell of justification. Bryn stepped into the falling light and let it pass through her the way it has to pass through mountains. For a heartbeat the green hesitated, reconsidering the value of stubborn women with swords. Einar widened his stance, bracing the air, then looked at Astrid. May I bias? He asked. No theatrics, just consent. Please, Astrid said, in the world, which had been hoping to be treated like a partner, perked up. Einar spoke his proper name in a tone that made the day reconcile with itself. He lifted his hands, palms open, and guided the hunger downward toward better fuel. Shame that rotted, cruelty that masqueraded as tradition, waste that pretended to be culture. The mouth obliged with a grudging competence. The audit hissed, because audits prefer easy accounts. The wolf's eyes narrowed, considering trouble as a friend invites you to misbehave. The green still pushed, heavy as a decision you don't want to make. Astrid felt her missing laughter rise in her chest like a bird trapped in a bell. It fluttered there, imitating what it remembered. She closed her eyes, not to pray. Prayer is loud here, but to listen. In the pause, she heard children in the village below her story laughing now, without her as conductor. She heard Jalti's humming lift at the exact place it always tripped and then succeed anyway. She heard Freya scolding the oven, and the oven consenting to bake. Laughter was already in the world, not homeless, circulating. The circle thread, perhaps insulted by her melancholy, brightened as if to say, invite it back if you dare. Fine, Astrid whispered to everything she loved. Come home. The green pressed harder. The circle thread sang, not music, not yet, but a draft of it. The keep thread grew hot against her wrist, and the pewter line. Oh, that one. Still like a gate in winter, explaining to wolves and winds alike that nothing enters here without introducing itself. The audit raised her keys and cast them at the loom that wasn't present and was, because the loom lives through the threads wherever they're being moral. Keys struck the circle thread and fell harmlessly into the sea, where unreasonable fish ignored them. She scowled and reached into her ledger to pull out an old human trick. Debt that has gone feral. She flung not owed things at Astrid. Someone else's silence. Someone else's mischance. Someone else's apology that never arrived. The not owed hit her and looked for purchase. The keep thread yanked it toward the green, where it belonged as fuel. The mouth swallowed, surprised to be served responsibly sourced calories. Stop feeding my appetite responsibly. The audit snapped. It confuses the paperwork. Then update your forms, Bryn said, slicing a thrown line of red tape, as if it were, red tape. Her sword enjoyed that more than it should have. The wolf padded nearer until his shadow touched Astrid's feet. You could let me in, he said softly, not bargaining. Offering. You could yield a little. I would take what you can afford to lose, and in return you would never fear breaking. Astrid answered with the honesty of a person who knows a trap and respects its craftsmanship. Tempting. No. And because refusal should sometimes bring gifts, she added, but you may take this. She lifted the spindle and spun out a single filament from the first thread. The echo of her laughter she'd given away to catch him before. She tied it to the keep thread and formed, there in the breath between his teeth and the mouth's pressure, a knot that does not impress anyone until it saves their life. A slip knot. Tight under pull, loose under release. For when you remember to let go, she said. He blinked, puzzled, then pleased. You have taught me a new ending, he acknowledged. Above them, the seam stuttered. Einar felt the day tilt and gave it a kinder angle. The audit made one last theatrical effort. Summon a storm made of rules. Try to drown them in compliance. And Bryn, to everyone's surprise, including the narrators, laughed. Not a pretty laugh. A warrior's laugh. The laugh you hear in training yards when someone tries a clever feint and trips on their own idea. It rang off stone and water and stubborn sky. It hit Astrid's ribs and pushed, gently, where the bird had been trapped. The circle thread flashed. Come home, Astrid told her laughter again, and this time a command at architecture. The laugh rose, still shy, still sore, and crossed the gap between what she had given and what she had kept. It didn't return as naivete. That would be insulting. It returned as courage that refuses bitterness its favorite seat. The green flinched. The mouth hiccuped. The audit, furious at humor complicating her flowcharts, ordered her oarsman to row backward, which is difficult for metaphors and men alike. Astrid laughed. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It warmed her teeth and made the circle thread a brighter shade of itself. Einar's shoulders dropped a fraction. The exact degree a man relaxes when the world's weight fits his hands more honestly. Bryn showed teeth, and it spooked the storm. The raven preened, which is applause and feather. The wolf watched, attention taut as bowstring. So, he said, you choose to remain mended and mendable. I choose to be repaired in public, Astrid said. It's cheaper for everyone. He nodded, ironically respectful. Then let us finish the first lesson and schedule the second. He leapt, not at Astrid, at the mouth. You've heard of wolves at doors. You've heard of devouring hunger. Here was a wolf biting down on the sky's bad habit. The green yowled. Yes, yowled very dignified, and tried to wrench free, but the slip knot caught. The more thrashed, the tighter meaning bound it to better meals. Einar guided the pull toward cruelty, shame, waste. The mouth chewed its penance like a child gagging on necessary herbs. Bryn held the line against the audit's last flurry of keys. The raven flew straight into the green, punched a hole exactly large enough for laughter to pass through, and came back smug with a hair out of place. When the mouth finally tore itself free, it did not close entirely. No, that's not how this world ends or keeps going. It narrowed to a thread stretched across the east like a scar you are not ashamed of because it proves you healed. The audit ship spun twice, confused by a horizon that refused to balance according to her favorite integers, and fled toward bookkeeping less likely to giggle. The wolf landed, shook himself, and grinned at Astrid like a colleague between disasters. You are improving, he said. You are required elsewhere, she replied, which for a moment made even a function feel managed. He bowed. Yes, bowed, and walked away along the Black Islands, his shadow committing minor poetries. The green dimmed to the polite. Seasonal lights the North pretends are nature, and not ongoing negotiations with older laws. The spit of stone exhaled. Einar leaned against nothing and made it look comfortable. Bryn slid her sword home with a satisfaction she did not dress in words. The raven landed on Astrid's shoulder and said, Well, the way a friend says well to mean. Do you notice you did that? Astrid breathed. Laughter sat where it belonged now. Not caged, not outsourced, ready to answer joy and not his armor. She looked east where the scene subsided, north where the bay glittered with resumed chores, west where the Thunderloom's memories still held the horizon together, and south where Ron's Hall was being sung to politely by fish who do not appreciate politics. For the first time since the three women had laid iron in her cradle, she felt the odd, precise pleasure of standing in a story and not rushing to its next corner. Einar cleared his throat. 2 things, he said. First, your work isn't over. Never is, she said. Second, the sky will remember you dare to reassign its appetite. There will be a summit. Summit. Bryn repeated, dubious. As in a meeting? As in? Einar said, and glanced upward as if expecting ravens to print an agenda. The old ones prefer to call it council. You'll be invited. You won't enjoy it. You'll win anyway. Astrid smiled with all the tired brightness of people who have earned a meal. Good. I brought thread. They turned back toward the village because victories here must be salted into dinner or they spoil. The raven flew high, drawing a thin line that looked suspiciously like a path only birds admit exists. The wind calm enough to gossip kindly. And if you felt the earth lean slightly toward them as they went, you're not wrong. The world likes to flatter its repairers when no one's looking. Night came dressed in reasonable stars. Fires opened their orange mouths to tell forgiving stories. Children practiced the word wolf with bravery that hadn't been assigned to them yet and found it fit anyway. Somewhere, the audit refiled her complaints under pending and tried to learn a new handwriting. Somewhere, the green rehearsed silence. Somewhere, the wolf smiled at a knot in his teeth and decided he liked the taste. Tomorrow, there will be a summons written on weather. Tomorrow, names will sit at a table made of arguments and choose a future. But tonight there's bread and a spindle cooling, and a girl who laughs again without apologizing to her work. Sleep. We'll need the morning for politics. Oh, ChatGPT-Ds. The summons arrived as weather with handwriting. Clouds gathered over the bay and organized themselves into a table, which is not subtle, and the wind set placed cards on the cliff where the standing stones had been pretending to nap. The raven pecked at one until the rune for Astrid decided to look like itself. Bryn tightened a strap no one else could see. Einar, named, stood with that deliberate ease of a man preparing to be polite to power and rude to inevitability. Astrid touched the spindle and felt the 3 threads answer, like instruments tuning to the same stubborn key. If you're expecting trumpets, you haven't been listening. The gods prefer entrances that look like whether you can blame. They came as functions first. Dawn put on a cloak and sat down. Tide arrived damp and unapologetic. Harvest shook seeds out her hair and barred a chair from sunlight. Then came the ones with biographies. Thunder stepped off his chariot goats with a grin he'd clearly meant to use later. Ron rose from the cliff face, trailing with authority. Modgut hovered at the threshold of air, as if reminding the council that doors exist for reasons. Net Mother wove her attention into the center of the table, and let it catch stray arrogance like lint. Hlee entered last, quiet, and the sky obeyed by practicing inside voice. And yes, the wolf patted in unbothered, as if summoned to a family meal where someone always suggests grace too loudly. He nodded to Astrid, a courtesy between adversaries who had discovered they share a favorite problem. Across from him, a chair held absence with intent. When the ravens perched on it, you didn't need me to tell you whose I was listening. The audit hovered offshore, balancing a ledger on her hip, like a baby she never learned to love properly, which is one definition of bureaucracy. Begin, said the chair with ravens, and the wind didn't dare mistranslate. Thunder folded arms that had started storms as gestures. The sky had a mouth, he said. The girl gave it manners. The mouth learned new food, Ron added, pleased and annoyed. Better fuel, less waste. Meaning was introduced before speech. Hlee said, which is about as high as praise goes in these halls. The audit sniffed, keys clinking the way guilt clinks when it thinks it's evidence. Order was not consulted. Order was the problem, Bryn said, and the way she said it made several old laws reconsider their posture. The chair with ravens tilted toward Einar. And you, said the listening thing behind it, told your name to the day. Do you know what you did? Yes, Einar said. I volunteered for consequences. A murmur passed to the council. That ancient sound that means we remember why we like you and now must decide whether liking is policy. Astrid stood, because sometimes being seated teaches the wrong lesson. She put the spindle on the cloud table. The threads brightened, threaded themselves through shadow and dew, and lay ready, circle, gate, keep, like 3 lines of signature. I asked the river how to keep what keeps me myself, she said without apology or ornament. It answered, by learning who I am without it. I have paid. I am still paying. I will pay more. The mouth is narrower. The wolf is useful. The villages are breathing. Time remembers how to behave in kitchens. But cracks remain. A new loom must exist that does not require thunder every time a human forgets how to be one. Ah, said Net Mother, delighted by children who propose infrastructure. A standing frame. Civic weaving. A charter, Flea murmured, of pauses and continuances. The wolf's eyes were winter-mused. You intend to regulate my appetite. Redirect. Astrid corrected. Make it expensive to chew what should be mended, and cheap to bite what should be shed. Ron smirked. You speak tide. I learn from you, Astrid said, and if gods had blushed, the sea would have tried. The audit opened her ledger as if it were a sword. Who authorizes this loom? The old order is not a suggestion. We cannot have seamstresses legislating hunger. Thunder chuckled. We already do. We call them mothers. Laughter rolled around the table. Cheap where it should be generous and generous where it should be cheap. No, I'm kidding, the opposite. They laughed like weather admits delight. Even the ravens clicked approval. The audit's mouth thinned to a line taught by rulers who think compassion is messy handwriting. Cost, she snapped. State the cost. Einar glanced at Astrid. This is a moment, his look said, when truth spends itself on purpose. Astrid took the stone spool from her pocket. Her father's river-worn weight, with a keep thread wound dully around it. The groove had deepened from use. It felt like a palm that fit her hand. She placed it beside the spindle. Cost. Steadiness pledged, she said. And more. The loom will require 3 anchors in the world. A laugh you don't own. A fear you refuse to outsource. A sorrow you carry without worship. Those are already mine. I offer them as pattern. The wolf watched her with that precise attention he reserves for wolves. And his? He flicked an ear toward Einar. My name, Einar said, and the wind thought about bowing. The loom will have the right to call me when bias is needed. I will answer within reason. The ravens whisper around the chair as if someone had just admitted strategy. The listening behind them smiled the way knives smile when they admire a better tool. Bind it to season, said the old intelligence. Not to whim. If men could summon you for every small mess, you become their favorite broom and despise them. Agreed, Einar said. Harvest, solstice, thaw, first frost. The loom may ask, and I may say no when the asking is lazy. Price, the audit said again, hungry because that is her nature. Bryn stood. When Bryn stands, rules adjust their skirts. I will hold the base, she said. In the world, with my back and my sword, and everything I've learned about telling trouble, not today. No salary, no altar, no songs unless they are short and rude. If the loom needs hands, it has mine. That is my tax. Several gods who pretend not to like mortals almost stood to bow. Clea's mouth softened. Net Mother shot Bryn a glance that meant both welcome and warning. The wolf looked at Bryn and did not smile, which is his way of saying, we will annoy each other with dignity. Then let her speak the terms, said the chair with ravens. And if you dislike the way we are handing this girl the quill, you should not have let her reassign a sky. Astrid breathed. The 3 threads touched her skin as if to say we are listening. Terms, she said, voice steady. 1. The loom is anchored in kitchens and thresholds, not in temples. If worship is required to use it, it has already failed. 2. The wolf's function is recognized as necessary, but its appetite is taxed. Each bite of what should be mended must be paid for by relinquishing something useless. 3. The sky's mouth remains a seam, not a gag. When it speaks truth that shames us, we listen. When it grows hungry for vanity, we feed it our vanity first. 4. The audit may observe but not collect unless cruelty has been dressed as order. 5. Weavers are many, not a priesthood. Anyone may mend with laughter, caution, and keeping if they pay their local price. Define local price, the audit said, because she will always ask a question that makes mercy specify itself. Whatever the mend requires that the mender can afford, Astrid said. Sometimes it will be time, sometimes pride, sometimes a secret return to its owner, never someone else's future. She looked at Hel's absence and felt approval like cool water on a burn. 6. Einar added, because good partners bring numbers, I serve by season and by choice. The loom does not enslave, it invites. 7. Bryn said, adjusting the sword she calls decisions. No negotiation at spear point. The loom works when fear is asked to sit, not kneel. Helene nodded. 8. She said, silence is a tool, not a punishment. Pauses are for breath, not for hiding harm. Ron flicked water from her fingers. 9. Debts drown equally, which is to say, if the loom's neck closes around a thief, it closes around the prince who pays the thief. No exception for tastefully embroidered titles. 10. Thunder boomed, unable to resist a round number. Let joy roll downhill. The chair with Raven shifted, amused and aroused in the political sense by the prospect of a new policy that did not embarrass the old ones. Adopted, said the listening. Piloted on this coast. If villages stop burning and babies laugh more, we will spread it like gossip. The audit scowled, but the ledger in her hands rearranged itself into a slimmer book with wider margins. She did not thank anyone. That is not her craft. The wolf stood, stretched, and spoke in the tone of a professional offering continuing education. And for the stink I keep, your shame, your waste, your cruelty, I will bring it to your doors in forms you cannot ignore. Not to gloat, to teach recycling. Polite compost, Bryn muttered, and it stuck. You will hear that phrase in markets next spring. The council adjourned with the efficiency of storms, deciding not to ruin a wedding. Weather exhaled its table. The gods withdrew into jobs they had not expected to enjoy today. Ron sank with a grin that promised trouble in the fund register. Lee touched Astrid's forehead with a hand made of hush. Net Mother tied an invisible knot around the cliff that will save someone you will never meet, and I refuse to spoil it. Only the wolf lingered. He stepped close enough that Astrid could smell the clean dark of him, like night polished. A question, he said, because of course he came to learn as much as to test. Ask, she said, not moving. When the cloth frays, and it will, because you are honest, who will be allowed to cut? I will, Astrid said, and those I teach, and those they teach. And occasionally, she added, because compromise is adult, you. He nodded, satisfied by a boundary he could bounce against. Good. No one becomes gentle by accident. He walked away with the predatory elegance of a man leaving a party before the jokes turned mean. The Raven settled on Astrid's shoulder, and because we are nearing the end of our running time and the narrator would like you to arrive fed, said, eat something. They ate. Of course they did. You cannot run a loom on fumes. Freya produced bread that tasted like rescue. Jalti hummed 5 notes now, and if you're keeping track, that 5th changed everything. A small courage that makes boats prefer harbor before storm. Bryn let herself smile where no one could see and then forgot to hide it. Einar stole a berry from a bowl, and the berry forgave him, which is one test of character. Night billed itself with competence. In the space after the council and before the last trial, Ast and Einar walked the ridge where stone knows your name by sound. He did not reach for her hand. You don't do that to a weaver whose palms are full world. She did not ask a question that would point romance at duty and make both sulk. Instead, they traded sentences about practicalities, which villages would serve as anchors, where it teach the mending how to draw a map that refuses to be a leash. At the council, she said finally, you almost said no. I almost did, he admitted, because saying yes turns me into a toll road, and men who become toll roads are always tempted to charge. Don't, she said. I won't, he said, and the way he said it made the promise walk by itself. The Raven coughed in that theatrical way friends use when they have been standing here for quite some time pretending not to. "The morning," he said, "will not wait for your metaphors." He dropped a fifth black thread into Astrid's palm. It was warm and rang faintly like iron remembering it once was thunder. Runes shaped themselves into something that was not a word so much as a location. Center. It said, like a compass that tells you who you are instead of where to go. They slept? Yes, they actually slept. Not long and not foolishly. The kind of sleep that packs provisions. Dreams did not bother them. Even prophecies need a day off. At dawn, the seam over the east glowed politely. Like a scar remembering the story, it refuses to reenact. The bay breathed. The village pretended not to watch and failed adorably. Astrid tied the fifth thread around her wrist with the other three. Fear gate pewter, laugh circle bright, keep steady, until her pulse beat inside a small, temporary tapestry. They walked to the center. What is the center? Not a mountain, not a temple. A clearing behind a longhouse where generations of practical rites had worn the grass into a circle. Marriages, promises. The thing with the goat that no one will explain to outsiders. The stones there had no carvings because everyone knew what they meant. This was where the loom would stand if looms liked daylight. This was where the last decision would choose its next name. People came, not to gawk, to stand in the field of it. Old women with knitting that had no intention of progressing while history was occurring. Children with hair in their eyes and questions in their mouths. Fishermen with hands still smelling of salt and justification. The healer who had paid the expensive story. Signa from the south. Bryn's scars. Einar's name shining slightly like a knife that knows when it's sheathed for a reason. Even the audit, skulking at the edges, trying curious on for size. And yes, the wolf at the last row, respectful like a predator who has learned that towns can be friends. Astrid stepped into the grass, and the grass stood taller. The spindle was light now, familiar as breath. She raised it, and the threads lifted too. 3 lines of habit made brave. "You asked who cuts when the cloth frays," she said to the world that was listening out loud. "We cut, we mend, we learn, we teach, we pay our own prices." She looked at her mother and father. "I will be gone often," she told them gently, "but I will come home often." She looked at Bryn. "You will tell me when I have mistaken stubbornness for virtue." She looked at Einar. "You will take what the loom asks only when saying yes respect the part of you that is not a road." "Deal," he said, which for once was the exact right word. The green seam flickered. One last test. Astrid spun. Not grandly, not heroically, but with the practical grace of someone tying a child's cloak before winter and making it not easy to undo. The circle thread ran around the field, and linked hands that thought they weren't ready to hold. The gate thread linked thresholds and taught doors to prefer welcome. The keep thread ran through kitchens and harbors and into the small, stubborn places where people decide to carry each other without needing a sermon. A fourth line formed of its own accord, braided from the 3 without permission. A weft of ordinary days. The center held. The loom, invisible and present, leaned against the world like a friend who knows when to leave and when to stay. The wolf lowered his head in assent. The audit sighed and sharpened a new pencil. Please smiled, and the silence learned new kindness. Netmother clipped a dangling thought and tucked it behind Astrid's ear. Thunder nodded, which is whether for I am proud of you, do not tell anyone. And because every epic earns its cliff before it offers its shore, the wind changed. It carried from the far horizon a scent like iron heated for decision. The raven spun in place and wrote a warning in the air, the way ravens do when they love drama as much as responsibility. He is coming, the letters said. Not the wolf. The other appetite. The one with a crown you've glimpsed in old poems. The one that prefers endings clear and total and calls them peace. The field did not panic. Children asked for snacks. Old women finished a row. Einar rolled his shoulders. Bryn smiled with her eyes. Astrid tightened the threads around her wrist and let herself be the person she had already become while we were watching. Yes, this is where we stop her today. And yes, I'm cruel. But you asked for an epic that lands in 10, not 9. The last part asked for breath. Take it now. Tomorrow we place the final stitch where endings learn to be beginnings on purpose. The warning hung in the sky like punctuation at the end of a long, proud sentence. He is coming. The letters dissolved into wind. But the meaning stayed, leaning against every rib cage that had learned to hope. Astrid looked east, where the sea was too flat, the clouds too deliberate. The light had gone that particular shade of gold that means the world is about to explain itself. Einar's jaw tightened. He wears endings like perfume, he said. They say even the wolf avoids his company. Bryn's hand rested on her sword, but not for comfort. And we, she said, are about to give closure indigestion. The raven laughed, a short, delighted call that made thunder somewhere chuckle in sympathy. The villagers stood at the edge of the field, quiet, attentive, the way people are when they realize they have wandered into myth and would rather not interrupt. At the horizon, the air cracked open, not violently, cleanly. A figure stepped through the seam, taller than any god and smaller than regret, cloaked in a color that wasn't color at all, absence pretending to have style. His face was calm, handsome in the boring way perfection always is. When he smiled, the light bent away to save its dignity. I am the quiet end, he said, and the grass bowed even though no wind moved. The full stop, the cease. You've made quite a noise. Astrid stepped forward. We've been mending. And leaving loose threads, he said mildly. Untidy things. Look around. Time leaks. Wolves teach manners. The living outvote the dead. It's inefficient. Einar exhaled. Efficiency is death's favorite metric. The quiet end tilted his head. You've taken a function out of rotation, he said. The hunger, the mouth, the need for closure. You've built continuity where there was supposed to be relief. I'll fix that. He reached out, and the day dimmed. The threads at Astrid's wrist snapped taut, defending instinctively. Circles shone bright as laughter, gate hummed like warning. Keep pulse with memory. The villagers gasped as the ground turned to parchment, the air to ink. The end was writing his correction. Astrid raised a spindle. You can't erase a story that's still speaking. He smiled, the kind of smile that belongs on tombstones. Watch me. The sky folded inward. Stars went silent. The wolf, lounging on the edge of the field, stood. No, he said. His voice was quiet, but had the weight of function, refusing reassignment. You only close what is finished. She isn't. You of all, defending incompletion? The end's laughter was soft, and it cracked mountains somewhere south. Your appetite with legs. Exactly, said the wolf. And appetite means there's still life left to want. He lunged, not as enemy but as boundary. The end stumbled, a rare verb for him. Astrid seized a moment, spinning the spindle so fast it blurred. The threads lifted, forming a shape between earth and sky. Not a wall, not a web, a horizon turned upright. The loom of thunder remembered itself and struck lightning across the seams. The old gods took note. Even the audit forgot to take minutes. You can't weave me, the end said, calm fraying. I can invite you, Astrid said. Everything belongs somewhere, even closure. She threw the keep thread forward. It wound around his wrist. He tried to pull back. The thread gave, flexing like mercy. He frowned, confused by being accommodated. The circle thread followed, bright as laughter in a funeral hall, wrapping his other hand. Then came the gate thread, fear, discipline, and awake, binding not to imprison but to instruct. Together they drew the end toward the field's center, where the villagers waited, holding one another's hands in a living circle. This is the cost, Astrid said softly. No more lonely endings. You end with us, not to us. For the first time, the end hesitated. His perfection cracked like glaze under warmth. You would share me? Yes, Astrid said. You deserve witnesses too. She wove. Light poured from her fingers. Sunrise colors, bread colors, skin and soil and ash. The threads bent, loop tightened, until the figure at the end was caught not in a cage but in a tapestry, a pattern of beginnings and endings holding hands. He blinked, and his eyes reflected not void but continuity. The sky breathed out. The stars blinked back on, relieved to have their jobs reinstated. The loom dissolved, its thunder satisfied. The spindle cooled. Astrid sank to one knee. exhaustion running through her like tide. Einar was there instantly, steadying her without ceremony. "Still mended?" he asked. "Still mending," she corrected, smiling. Bryn sheathed her sword and squinted at the horizon, where color was returning like courage. "Is he gone?" "No," said the raven from her shoulder. "Better. He's employed." Indeed, in the clouds above, the new constellation of the Weave glowed faintly. 3 lines crossing, one not in the center, and beside them, a small white spark, the end embedded, behaving. The gods reappeared in weather and applause. Thunder laughed until lightning sprouted flowers. Ron sent a gentle wave over the shore. Net Mother cut a ribbon of daylight and pinned it to the wind. Lee touched Astrid's shoulder. "Silence is grateful," she murmured. The wolf circled once, watching the pattern settle. "You've improved the menu," he said. "Continuity tastes better than emptiness." "Try moderation," Astrid told him. "I'll try," he said, "but don't count on it." He padded off toward the north, humming a tune that might one day become winter. The audit sighed, flipped her ledger close, and muttered, "Fine." She dipped her quill in joy, wrote balance enough, and disappeared in a swirl of bureaucratic dignity. The villagers began to cheer, carefully at first, then with abandon. Freya pressed her face into her daughter's hair and whispered, "We taught you to spin linen. I suppose that counted." Jalti kissed Astrid's forehead. "Boats float better when the sea admires them," he said. "Apparently, so do girls." Einar looked up at the constellations. "They'll tell this story wrong," he said. "That's how stories survive," Astrid answered. "They evolve. Do you ever tire of fixing the world?" "Every day," she said. "That's why I keep doing it." Bryn stretched. "So what now?" "Now," Astrid said, "we teach others to mend." She held the spindle out. A child stepped forward. The fisher's daughter with the ribbon scar. Astrid placed the tool in her hands. "It listens," she said. "Don't let it get bored." The child nodded solemnly, then smiled the kind of smile that starts new centuries. The wind shifted. In the far north, the aurora unrolled, but it was different now, woven, patterned, deliberate. Colors danced in spirals that resembled thread on a loom. And if you listened carefully, beneath the thunder, beneath the sea, beneath even your own heartbeat, you could hear laughter, steady, fearless, and full of keeping. Astrid stood at the cliff, Einar beside her, Bryn on her other side, the ravens circling above. "We made a future," she said quietly. "No," Einar said, watching dawn find the water. "You made it possible to have one." She nodded. "That's enough." It was. The world hummed. Not fixed but fixable, and that's the closest thing to paradise you can responsibly promise. The gods returned to their rhythms, the wolf to his patience, and humanity to its endless, blessed work of mending. Above them, the new seam of light curved across the heavens like a thread pulled through a long, stubborn fabric, and it held.